Andrew, thank you very much. Morning to you, morning everyone. Welcome to the show. At 10 o'clock.
Both sides underline that no agreement is feasible if these issues are not solved.
Corridor slanging matches between negotiating teams in a Brexit bust-up as the PM and EU agree on one thing. This is the final chance to get a deal.
Our Prime Minister promised when he was campaigning to leave the EU that getting a deal with the EU would be really, really easy. The EU is our biggest trading partner. It's really important that the Prime Minister keeps his promise.
The Prime Minister said to have the support of his cabinet to yank the UK out of trade talks and depart without a deal if progress cannot be made in the next 48 hours. Given the new demands asked for by the EU, is now the time for the UK to walk away.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 10 o'clock, British and EU negotiators will meet in Brussels later for last-ditch Brexit trade talks. Government sources have warned the process may still conclude without an agreement. Boris Johnson and the President of the European Commission held an hour-long call yesterday and will speak again tomorrow. Ursula von der Leyen updated reporters on the state of discussions.
We welcome the fact that progress has been achieved in many areas. Nevertheless, significant differences remain on the three critical issues: level playing field, governance and fisheries. Both sides underline that no agreement is feasible if these issues are not solved.
Preparations are being made at hospitals across the UK to deliver COVID-19 vaccines from Tuesday. 50 hubs have been chosen to administer the jab in England. People aged 80 and over, care home workers and NHS staff at higher risk will be first in the queue. A survey suggests the majority of the British public doesn't trust the government to manage the pandemic. It's the first time since April people have taken that view overall, based on a series of studies. Nearly 7 in 10 respondents to the King's College research said the response to COVID-19 had been confused and inconsistent. Millwall fans who booed their team for taking the knee have been strongly condemned by the FA. Players were showing support for the Black Lives Matter movement before their championship match against Derby County. Former England player John Barnes says it's not appropriate to heckle the gesture.
These aren't football fans. These aren't Millwall fans. They're normal human beings who have a perception of this movement based on their ideology. Nothing to do with being a Millwall fan, a Grimsby fan, a Colchester fan. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit more nuanced than saying it's anti-discriminatory, if you like. But for me, if they don't like it, keep their mouth shut.
England's one-day cricket tour of South Africa is understood to be on the verge of cancellation. The opening match has been abandoned for a second time after 2 members of the touring party received unconfirmed positive tests for COVID-19. The first ODI was originally called off on Friday after a member of the home side contracted the virus. And today's weather: cloudy with patchy rain over northern England, Wales and the Midlands. Mostly fine elsewhere, especially in western Scotland. A high of 7 Celsius. From Global's newsroom, I'm Thomas Watts.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster.
Just gone 10. Hello, good morning and welcome to the show. You are listening and watching Swarbrick on Sunday here live on LBC. I'm Tom Swarbrick. Hope we find you very well this Sunday morning. Coming up, in the next few days, the largest logistical operation in the NHS's history will get underway as the vaccine rollout begins in earnest. Over 80s are to go first, plus those care workers too. 50 hospital centres are on standby to administer the jab. If you're in that age category or you do that job, will you be signing up for it? We'll speak to the World Health Organization. Plus, as Brexit now looks likelier than ever to end in no trade deal, we'll look at the impact on HGV drivers, the ports, farmers, with concerns about tariffs, about food price increases and delays at the border, meaning vital supplies like the vaccine to end the pandemic are having to be flown in by the military. Details to come.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC.
Very good morning to you. It was a last-minute demand from the French president that seems to have sparked the Brexit storm. Deep in the bowels of a windowless room below Whitehall, talks were progressing, but the narrative goes, at the final moment, the call came from Macron to insist that Britain follow EU rules on standards even once Britain exited. Cups of cold sick have been greeted with greater joy. There are reports this morning that suggest that the negotiating teams were shouting at each other in the corridors of the cave at 1:30 in the morning. The upshot this morning is that a no deal on trade looks increasingly likely. In fact, some insiders are saying in the papers that the chances of a deal are now less than 50%. This week, the government is tabling legislation that sees it break international law by breaking parts of the withdrawal agreement that it signed with the European Union last year. Once that happens, I'm afraid it is hard to see how the EU comes back to the table to negotiate with the UK in good faith. Who or what is then to blame if talks do collapse? Is it Johnson who will be right to blame the EU? Do you think that is accurate? Or does it turn out that you can't have your cake and eat it? Do you think that the financial implications of no deal can be covered, particularly given the debt mountain that the government has actually built up dealing with coronavirus? What's a no-deal Brexit when you've already borrowed 300 billion quid? 0345 6060 973 is the number. Would you support Boris Johnson in leaving without a deal, even though a free trade deal with the EU was once described as a deal that should be one of the easiest in human history? 0345 6060 973. We'll speak to the Environment Secretary in a few moments' time. First, at 6 minutes past 10, I'm joined by Lord Michael Howard, former Conservative leader, of course, and Conservative peer in the House of Lords. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, Lord Howard. Do you think it's right that Boris Johnson walks away?
Well, if the EU, as we read, are making a series of quite unreasonable demands, then of course he has to walk away. We can't sign up to everything that President Macron thinks we ought to sign up to and brings on the table at the last minute.
Is it the case that Macron and the French did this at the last minute, or is this an old demand that's been reheated? There are competing narratives around that. Which are you more inclined to believe?
Well, what I read, I'm not in the negotiations, so I don't know. I have to go on what I read, and what I read is that this was something which was introduced at the last minute. But even the things that were not introduced at the last minute are completely unreasonable. It is completely unreasonable, for example, to suggest that French fishermen should be allowed to fish exactly as they do now for 10 years. We are going to have control of our fisheries when we leave. And of course, it's perfectly reasonable to have a transitional arrangement so they don't lose everything all at once. But to suggest they should have exactly the same as they have now for 10 years seems to me to be completely unreasonable.
What should happen if a deal is agreed upon in the next sort of 48 hours or so? The time to ratify it is incredibly short. Do you think there's a chance that we could see a short extension to the transition period in order for a deal to be ratified in both parliaments?
No, I think if a deal is agreed in the next couple of days, I think it can all be done and dusted by the end of the year. After all, the vast majority of the things which have needed to be discussed are agreed. 98%, we're told, has been agreed, and the text has been agreed. So actually, if, as I devoutly hope will be the case, a sensible agreement is reached, as you say, in the next few days, I don't think there'll be a problem in getting it ratified before the end of the year.
So no need to extend. I note that the Environment Secretary has talked about you can always extend if there is a problem, but you say you don't need it.
Well, your assumption at the beginning of your question was if a deal is done within the next few days. If a deal is done within the next few days, we won't need to extend. If it isn't, well, then who knows if there is still a prospect.
But you're not
deal,
implacably.
maybe...
I guess my point is you're not implacably opposed to that. As a senior Brexiteer, as a Conservative peer, you don't really mind too much if an extension is made to the transition in order to get a deal over the line, or do you?
No, not if it looks as though we are really close to a deal, and those few days could make all the difference.
The government is set to bring in legislation that does break with international law. How do you feel about that?
Oh, I opposed that in the House of Lords when they brought it to the House of Lords first time round. And if they bring it to the House of Lords again, I will oppose it again.
Because of the principal point that you don't go around breaking international law, particularly when you're involved in negotiations with the people that you've just signed up to something that you're now looking to break.
Exactly, particularly when you're reneging from a treaty which you signed, the current government signed just a year ago, took to the United Nations so that it can have the force of international law. I believe in the rule of law, and we have a great reputation as a country for upholding the rule of law. So I don't want to see any further damage done to our reputation.
There are plenty of people who would say that it was a failure of statecraft to walk away without a deal here. How much blame do you think can be attached to Boris Johnson and his government if a deal isn't reached?
Well, I think it is, I'm afraid, the fault of these very unreasonable demands which the European Union seems to be making. For example, one of the issues has been whether we should commit ourselves to no state subsidies in the way that the Europeans have. And then at the last minute, they say, of course, that doesn't apply to the European Commission. So they're asking us to say we won't have any state subsidies when they themselves say they will continue to do so. So I'm afraid I do think the European Union has been thoroughly unreasonable in its approach to the negotiation.
I can certainly see the point of principle. I can see how it might be seen as unreasonable, particularly if you're dealing with a sovereign country. But the impact on people's lives if we go to no deal could be catastrophic. Food prices are going to increase. There are going to be massive problems at the borders. We've already seen reports in the papers this morning about stuff having to be flown in because they can't make sure the borders are clear enough to allow perishable goods, including things like the vaccine, to come in quickly enough. Surely that's not a risk worth taking for a point of principle with people's real lives.
Now, I think in your question, you've grossly exaggerated the difficulties which we may encounter. It is not going to be catastrophic. There may be some disruption. There may be some
consequences. Tell that to Britain's farmers. 48% is the WTO tariff on lamb exports into the EU if we go to no deal. 48%.
Well, our farmers have been very inventive at finding other export markets, and other things may affect the price of lamb as well. We don't know, for example, we don't know what's going to happen.
We're willing to slap that on British farmers. We're willing to put HGV drivers through greater red tape in order to get their goods to and fro. In order to uphold this point of principle about we're a sovereign country, we're not going to give over on this piece of regulation or standardised rule book.
No. It's not just a question of principle, Tom, although it is a question of principle. It's other things as well. We are negotiating, or the government is negotiating, to get a deal which is in the best interests of the British people. It's not simply a point of principle that says our fishermen should have the majority of the fishing catch in our waters. It affects their livelihoods. It's not merely a point of principle which says we have to decide on whether or not we're going to help our industries which may encounter difficulties. That's a matter of our national interest. It's not simply a point of principle. It's a point of principle which has real consequences for the welfare and well-being of the people of our country.
Lord Michael Howard, always grateful for your time. Thank you. You're former leader of the Conservative Party and, of course, former Home Secretary. I want to come to your calls on this. We'll speak to Theo Usherwood in a few moments' time, LBC's political editor, as we gear up for a very, very big week in Brexit talks. 0345 6060 973 is my number. Martin is in Bodelwyddan in North Wales. Hi there, Martin.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well, sir. Do you think we should walk away now?
Absolutely. Close the file, walk out. We should not be dictated to by Macron, by anybody. Totally,
do you not think
that's it.
Do you not think, though, that this is all set up to get a deal? That once we've got to the drama and the bluster of arguments in corridors at 1:30 in the morning and, last-minute requests made of the British government, that actually it's set up for a concession to be made somewhere to get a deal over the line?
Well, let's put it this way. This country is the biggest importer and buyer of foreign cars, i.e. BMWs, Renaults, everything. So are they prepared to lose that market? You were talking about lamb earlier. Lamb is so expensive in this country because it's all getting shipped abroad. The farmers in this country do a great job, and they should be rewarded, as be the fishermen.
It's not going to be a reward, is it? If you're a farmer, if you're slapped with a 48% tariff on exporting your lamb, how's that a reward?
But they are going to sell more lamb. You walk in a supermarket, you walk in a butcher's, Lamb is what, $9.30 a kilo in this country, right? Because of all the hangers-on. The farmers don't get the money. It's all the hangers-on down the line that get the money. The exporters, everybody. And if that was cut out, the British people would buy more of a fantastic produce, Welsh lamb, British beef. They would buy it all. And the market.
So there's no need to export. If we go to no deal, British farmers can expect British people to buy British goods, even though 80% of lamb is sent abroad.
Yeah, of course it is, because it's the middlemen that are raking the money. The farmers aren't getting the money for the lamb. You go to a market, a lamb probably makes £80 on the hoof, right? That lamb breaks down after everybody else has got it, and the European. And
you're satisfied, Martin? You would be satisfied at this country coming out onto WTO terms, trading in the way that Afghanistan does or Australia does with the European Union?
Absolutely, because Australia trades lamb to the Middle East in the boatloads. Absolute boatloads.
It does. Unfortunately, the UK market
I've been there, worked there, I've seen what they do.
I get that, but unfortunately, the UK is not in a position to trade with the Middle East and things like lamb in the way that Australia is. We're nowhere near the numbers that they are. The overwhelming majority of it goes to the EU. Martin, we'll leave it there. Thank you. 0345 6060 973 is my number. 84850 to text. It does seem like we're heading, some of the reports in the papers are to be believed, and we'll go through them in just a moment, to no deal. Do you think that is the right outcome ultimately? Come to your calls in a moment. Tom Swarbrick here, 1016.
This is LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster on LBC.
Morning to you. 10:19 is the time. Swarbrick on Sunday here on LBC. I'm Tom Swarbrick. Listen, we've been saying for a few weeks on the programme now that the next week is a crucial week for Brexit negotiations. They're all crucial weeks, but we do seem to have come to the final furlong now. Indeed, the Prime Minister suggesting in the papers that this really is the final chance now to get a deal over the line. If not, it seems like the Cabinet backs the Prime Minister in walking away and going to no deal, which would, I'm afraid, and we'll talk about it with the Environment Minister in a few moments, create all kinds of problems for the UK. We would go to WTO trading terms. That means tariffs on goods like lamb, like problems for HGV drivers at the border when it comes to filling in customs declarations. And it's all very easy to say, well, we'll sort it. But short term, medium term, that could be a real problem. Kevin tweets at LBC, I'm sure there would be queues of lorries containing French cheese and Spanish vegetables sitting at Calais trying to get to the UK. Try being a bit balanced, Tom. Well, I'm sure there would be, but that's no good either. Oh, well, that's okay then. We've got lorries load of cheese on the French side. They're queuing for ages. That's actually a massive problem for us because we can't get the food in. 0345 6060 973. Come to your calls in just a moment. Let's start on that subject. The Observer front page this morning. Military planes to fly vaccines in to avoid ports hit by Brexit. The paper says tens of millions of doses of COVID-19 manufactured in Belgium will be flown to Britain by military aircraft to avoid delays at ports caused by Brexit. Under contingency plans being developed by the government. We'll put that to the Environment Minister in just a moment. Sunday Times, Cabinet backs Johnson over no-deal Brexit. Support for the PM as talks go to the wire. Over at lbc.co.uk, UK and EU Brexit talks to resume in final throw of the dice. 48 hours, we're told. If nothing is done by Monday night, that could be it. The Mail on Sunday, royals are expected to set example to boost take-up of vital COVID jab. The Queen will get the vaccine in weeks, they say, as the vaccine rollout begins. Similar theme on the Sunday Mirror, corona vaccine boost will give the jab a stab. Lots of people chiming in to say, lots of well-known people chiming in to say they are going to get it. Sunday Express, final throw of the dice. One last chance for Brexit deal, but EU told Boris won't budge. We'll see. Queen to tell Britain when she has had the COVID vaccine as well on their front page. Sunday People, care home vaccine chaos. COVID vaccine plans for frail care home residents were in chaos last night after they were told, get on the bus. There's a real logistical challenge about getting the vaccine into care homes, given the way in which it is being transported and the temperatures it has to be kept at. We'll look at that in more detail a bit later. Sunday Telegraph, final throw of the dice. Picture of Boris Johnson on the phone to Ursula von der Leyen last night. Brexit trade talks to restart in last push for deal. But Britain warns EU has so far failed to respect its independence. Let's turn to Theo Usherwood, LBC's political editor, who joins me this Sunday morning. Theo, thank you for being there for us. What are we to make then of the narrative of the French putting down a last-minute, absolutely disagreeable request to the British that has blown up the talks? Do you think that is actually what happened?
It's clear, Tom, from the narrative on Thursday when things were looking up. It was looking very positive in terms of getting a deal Thursday afternoon into Thursday evening. Something happened overnight, and it looks like, of course, from what Number 10 is briefing out, that this was a problem with the French, particularly around level playing field, but most importantly around fishing quotas, the right of French fishermen to fish in UK territorial waters. That Boris Johnson and Number 10 and the British negotiating side simply said was an 11th hour swerve ball that simply they could not agree to. Of course, this isn't the first time the French have caused problems at the last minute. Theresa May was on the tarmac in Brussels with her deal originally, and then the French turned around and caused a huge problem there. Of course, Emmanuel Macron, the French president, has a domestic audience that he has to play to, and of course, he does not want to be seen to cave in to that constituency, the French fishermen, and of course agricultural as well, by caving into the British demands and leaving them high and dry. So we enter what should be the final day of negotiations, following that call with Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, and Boris Johnson last night, still some way from a deal. Now, in terms of what comes next, does the deal have to be done tonight? Not necessarily, but there is a sort of deadline tomorrow with the Internal Market Bill coming back to the House of Commons. The government's insisted that it's going to reinsert parts of that legislation that were voted down in the House of Lords last month. And those clauses, of course, as Northern Ireland Secretary Brandon Lewis said, break the withdrawal agreement, break international law in a very limited and specific way. And if that legislation were to pass, there would be absolutely no chance of a trade deal with the European Union. Now, the thinking had been that actually, if a deal could be done, the government could back away, save face, and not reinsert the clauses, and therefore it'd be possible to do a deal. And of course, it's worth mentioning those clauses only apply in the event of no deal. So in terms of what happens next, if a deal isn't to be done tonight, then the government will either have to push back the reconsideration of those Lords' changes, and i.e., are they going to reinsert those clauses, or they're going to have to find a way or a promise to their European counterparts of taking them out should a deal be reached in a week's time. Of course, there is a European Council summit. That's the 27 other leaders of the European nations at the end of this week coming, and that was when they were expecting to approve the deal on the recommendation of Michel Barnier, the chief negotiator for the European Commission's side. But there is a little bit of wriggle room there in terms of that being pushed back to the following week with a multi-Zoom call.
And just finally on this, Theo, the internal UK politics of this. On the one hand, you have a cabinet that does have within it people who voted Remain during the referendum and who have been apparently up until this point pretty implacably opposed to no deal, who are now on the side of the Prime Minister and have ditched those reservations. And secondly, you've got an issue for the Labour Party about whether or not they would back any deal that came to Parliament. Of course, if they didn't vote for it or it got voted down, then we'd go to no deal.
Yes, I mean, it's worth mentioning the Labour Party problem. All Keir Starmer, the Labour Party leader, has said so far is that the party is going to be united. But there's been talk that the Labour leadership is united behind what is the question?
Yeah,
united behind voting for the deal, united behind abstaining on the deal, or united behind voting against the deal. And the talk has been that actually Keir Starmer sees Brexit, and we know that he sees Brexit as one of those issues which has done a huge amount of damage to the Labour Party, particularly in red wall seats. He doesn't want to give the Tories any ammunition going into the next election by saying, well, your MPs voted against a trade deal, voted against leaving Europe. And of course, if the deal were to be voted down, and let's say Boris Johnson ends up, his stock is lower than it was back at the end of the summer in September with all of these, with the COVID restriction rules. You could end up in a situation where if Labour were to whip against it, Tory MPs, old ERGers, the likes of Steve Baker and Andrew Bridgen, were to turn around and say, well, actually, there's been a huge concession here on key issues. You could end up in a situation, Tom, where this trade deal were to be voted down in the House of Commons, and then we would move to no deal. So Keir Starmer has a difficult path ahead of him. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but that has got to be a consideration for the Labour leadership.
We'll speak to Labour in a few moments' time. Theo, thank you very much indeed. LBC's political editor, Theo Ursula, joining us this morning. Let's come to your calls. Marie is in Wraysbury. Hi there, Marie.
Hello. Good morning to you, Tom.
Morning.
Yeah, I just would like to say this. We really wouldn't want a no deal, but if we have to go right to the wire. If that means shouting in the corridors, shout in the corridors. But what we've got to stop and look at is the much bigger picture. This country lost so much production of so many goods, especially in farming. We've allowed so many, how can I put it? I don't like to buy fish that comes from foreign countries when we had our own fish here. I'm old enough to remember the days.
You don't like to buy fish from foreign countries?
Yeah, well, we're talking about from European countries. The fish was coming in here packed, coming in from other countries when we had fish on our own shores, wet fish, fresh fish, not frozen fish, that you could go and buy.
So if you see a pack of, I don't know, if you go to the shop, Marie, and you see some frozen prawns that have come in from France, you turn your nose up.
Well, no, I don't mean it like that. That you're not hearing my whole picture. I'm trying to say to you, I want to buy my fish fresh, but it's not just the fish; it's all farming goods. Right. I come from a farming family. I know what it's like. And all I can say is that all the people in this country can eat from our farms, and that includes vegetables. If you go through France, and I've driven through it many, many times, the fields are full of vegetables growing. Where are our vegetables?
But Marie, if that's fine. That might be where we get to. That might be where we get to in 10 years' time.
Yes,
the British farms. Hang on a sec, Marie. Let me speak. Marie, let me speak.
Driving through our roads, they're not paying the tolls. We have to go aboard. We have to pay tolls from the minute you arrive in France.
Yep.
Now, that's fine. We've been doing it, but we've had our roads churned up for years and years and years. They're not paying those tolls.
So
we've got to get those off. And the other side of the picture is, Tom, global warming and all the emissions. I've had asthma, and I know lots of people with asthma because of diesel trucks and their rat runs right through this country, driving through this country with goods coming in from abroad that we should now be making within this country.
That's fine. Marie, that's fine. If you want, if we're going to be much more self-sufficient when it comes from the farm to the plate, the farms produce the food that the majority is eaten in Britain. That's fine. But how do you explain to farmers, in particular? It's not just farmers, of course, that are affected by this. How do you explain to farmers in particular that overnight a 48% tariff is applied to the food that they are sending, the goods that they are sending to the European Union, of course, which is their biggest market right now? Marie, thank you. 0345 6060 973. Loads of you want to get on this morning. Come to more of your calls. We'll speak to the Environment Secretary, George Eustice, in just a few moments' time as well. Swarbrick on Sunday. Tom Swarbrick here, 10:30. News headlines now. Thomas Watts.
The UK's Brexit negotiating team is due in Brussels for last-ditch trade talks with the EU. The former Conservative leader, Lord Howard, has told Swarbrick on Sunday he believes a sensible agreement is still possible. Frontline NHS staff, care home workers and people over the age of 80 will be the first to get the COVID-19 vaccine from Tuesday. 50 hospitals in England have been chosen to serve as hubs for administering the jab. Figures show a planned Thames crossing between Kent and Essex could contribute more than 5 million tonnes of carbon emissions. The road, which includes a 2.5-mile tunnel, is designed to connect the M2 and the M25. And the weather cloudy with patchy rain over northern England, Wales and the Midlands, mostly fine elsewhere, especially in western Scotland, a high of 7 Celsius.
This is LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Text 84850.
10:35 the time. Alexandra, you're going to be next on the radio on this. First, though, I'm joined by George Eustice, Secretary of State for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Conservative MP for Camborne and Redruth. Thank you very much for coming on the programme again this week, Mr. Eustice. Good to see you. I want to talk about the effect of going to a no deal, if indeed that's where we're to end up. You've said previously that farmers would get, quote, as much support or perhaps even more as they get now in the event of a no deal Brexit. Do you stand by that?
Yes, and actually that's not affected by whether or not there's an agreement. We've already set out our approach to funding agriculture, both in our manifesto and in the spending review. And we have maintained the budget in cash terms at the 2019 level. And it's important to recognise the EU has cut their budget by 10%. And we've also locked in a favourable exchange rate for agriculture that's about 20% higher than the pre-referendum rate. So it is the case that we are making available the same in cash terms that was there in 2019 for every part of the UK.
So farmers need not fear a no deal?
Well, as I've said previously, if there is no agreement, no further agreement, and tariffs are applied in both directions, for those sectors where we are a net exporter, and that principally means the sheep sector, there would be some impacts on them. So we would be working very hard to identify alternative markets. But for those sectors where we are a net importer, such as beef and dairy and pigs and poultry, well, they would probably have the opportunity to displace some of the imports that currently come from the EU. So there would be some opportunities for them. But look, all of this would be a little bit disruptive. We recognise that. That's why we are still working hard to try to get a free trade agreement overall. You couch the disruption that could be caused to the farming sector, particularly the lamb exports, in cosy terms, but the truth is a 48% tariff would be applied to lamb going into the European Union. The boss of the Country Land and Business Association has said if the EU imposes tariffs, many farmers will no longer have customers for their produce and their businesses could easily collapse. Have you agreed with the EU that they won't apply tariffs under WTO terms to that particular export? Well, if there is a trade agreement, it'll be zero tariffs on all goods. If there's no trade agreement, if there's no trade agreement, the position of the European Union at the moment is that they will apply the common external tariff, which would mean tariffs on lamb. And the position of the UK government is we would apply the UK global tariff, meaning we would similarly place tariffs on imported goods such as Irish beef, Danish dairy products, poultry from the Netherlands and so on.
So would the government step in to, one, support those farms that are going to go out of business if they have to export at that rate, and two, going to do something to try and bring food prices back down, because food prices will go up?
Well, we've looked quite closely at this, and in the context of the lamb sector, the first thing to say, they've had a very, very good year during 2020. Prices are actually running about 15% above the previous years. That's partly because there's huge demand at the moment from China and a global shortage. So in a way, in this context, it is quite possible that the sector is better able to weather the impacts of there being no agreement than it might have been, say, 2 or 3 years ago.
But they're not. Are they going to get government help? Sorry to interrupt, Minister. Are they going to get government help to keep viable January the 2nd if we've gone into no deal?
Well, the important thing is that most of the lambs are exported to the European Union during the months of September and October. The trade starts to pick up from about June onwards. So we don't envisage any short-term impacts, since there's very little trade happening in the first quarter of this year. After that, there could be some impacts. But as I said, if you put this in the context of the fact that there's a global shortage in lamb and prices are currently running 15% higher, it may be that the lamb sector is able to weather this. If it can't, and if there are short-term impacts that are severe, we've already designed the types of intervention schemes that we'd be able to come forward with. That includes a headage payment for ewes, or possibly as well a slaughterhouse premium for lambs. So we've developed both those schemes should they be needed, but they may not be needed. They may not, but this goes to the point about why a no deal is shooting ourselves in the foot. The government will be using taxpayers' money to help bail out industries that in December wouldn't need bailing out and wouldn't need bailing out if we had a trade agreement. And do you accept that food prices will rise in the event of a no deal?
Well, look, on the first point, it's also important to recognise that the government would be collecting tariffs and would therefore have exchequer revenue coming from the tariffs that we apply on imported foods. So that would offset the costs of some of these things. The second point around food prices, yes, we've looked at that. The impact of tariffs on consumer food prices is actually quite modest, probably less than 2%. And just to put that into context,
that's 2% up.
Well, food prices tend to go up or down by about 7% in any given year. The other thing is that exchange rates...
No deal would increase it by 2%, you're suggesting?
It may be a bit less than that, probably about 1.8% is what some of the modelling suggests. The important thing to recognise is that when it comes to the average shopping basket, there are vast numbers of products like bread and milk and many other things that we produce here, vegetables, potatoes and so on, that wouldn't be affected whether or not there's a trade agreement. There would be some sectors where there might be a bit of an increase in prices, but pork and beef tend to make up a relatively small proportion of the average shopping basket. Okay. Pork's only about 1% of household spending on food.
If we bar EU fishing boats from our waters, how is that going to be policed?
Well, we have a fisheries protection fleet. It's part of the Royal Navy, the oldest part of it. We also have a control centre in Newcastle that monitors every fishing vessel that's in our waters.
And have they been boosted? Have they got more numbers now? Are they being extra staffed in case of this?
Yes, we've taken on 2 additional vessels to supplement the work that the Royal Navy do to increase capacity. It's also the case that the Navy have just brought forward 3 new offshore patrol vessels and have decided not to decommission the old ones at this point, so that there's some reserve capacity to draw on. And we've also
so the Navy patrols the waters to stop the boats coming in to fish if we go to no deal.
And that's always been the case, supplemented, of course, by the private contractors that we have. It's the role of the Marine Management Organisation to police our fisheries, something they've done for many years, the support of the Royal Navy, with the support of others such as the inshore fisheries and conservation agencies who also have vessels at their disposal.
Let me ask you then about the ports and the crossings into the country. There's a suggestion that the UK border clearance is going to be open 24 hours, but on the French side, it isn't. Why is that? And doesn't that mean that lorries coming into the UK won't be able to get in as smoothly as they would if there was a deal?
Well, on our own border checks, we've actually adopted a phased approach. So from day one, we won't be checking lorries coming into the country for the so-called BCP checks. Those are the checks for on food under the official control regime. We will, from April, start to check some of the paperwork. And then from July, we'll start to phase in physical checks. Now, it will be for the European Union, obviously, to determine what they want to do. Our understanding from the French authorities is that they've built infrastructure to cope with this, enough to be able to park 100 lorries at a time to be checked. The French have done their own work on this. They believe that capacity is sufficient.
That's a hope, isn't it? We hope that the French side are sufficiently ready for this because we need food to come into the country, and particularly perishable goods for those just-in-time supply chains. What contingencies are therefore in place to get those perishable goods out of those lorries and over the border into the UK should we need them quickly if there are problems at the border?
Well, if there are problems, there won't be problems at our end of the border, since we won't be creating unnecessary checks. It would affect us, and of course, what we can't do. It's not our job to dictate to the French authorities how to implement EU law or how to implement the official control regime. They do have a regime, though, that is similar to ours, since we've brought that across through retained EU law. We have done work with the French authorities. They are confident that they have the capacity to cope with this. They've also indicated as well that if there were pinch points, well, then they would take a sensible, pragmatic, risk-based approach.
What does that mean? Because there are reports this morning of planes being on standby to get whether it's the vaccine out, and I'm aware of an undertaking over the summer to look at the possibility of getting the military involved to get those goods from the other side of the channel into the country if there are problems.
Well, we've had plans for 18 months that in the event of there being disruption at the border and friction at the border caused by lack of preparedness by the European Union, which has always been high on our risk list, obviously. In that event, we've got contingencies in place. It includes approaches to the border, to managing traffic on our side of the border, but it also includes a government procured transport service as well for priority goods, and that includes all medicines.
Oh, so the government have got a scheme in place to lift the medicines out, to transport them ourselves into the country if there's a problem at the border on the French side?
We've had a plan to do that for at least 18 months.
Let me two very quick things, because I know I've got to let you go. You've said previously that if there's a deal, you can always extend. You said that a little bit earlier this morning. Do you mean by that the transition period, that you could extend the transition period if there were difficulties in getting this thing ratified quickly?
No, the transition period will not be extended. The point that I made is the next 72 hours are pretty critical. But if there's goodwill during that 72 hours and progress is made, well, it might be that there's not a cut-off point on Wednesday. It might be that actually the parties agree that they're nearly there, so persevere for a few more days.
Okay, glad we can clear that up. And just a final question. It's amazing that it's the final question is on the vaccine that is coming to rescue us from this pandemic. Can you confirm whether the government is looking at immunity passports?
Well, I'm not aware of that. Look, what we're trying to do is obviously get the maximum uptake of this vaccine. We want to reassure people that this has been through a very robust independent authorization process. It's very important that we roll this out starting with those most vulnerable groups, those who are over the age of 80 or in care homes, and also care home and NHS staff in the first instance. So that's what we're going to be cracking on with this week.
Good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for your time. George Eustice, Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Conservative MB for Camborne and Redruth. Alexandra, I promised you would get on the radio. I'm afraid I've run out of time, but stay there, because I promise I'll come to your call in a moment. We'll speak to Labour in just a second as well. Sarah Jones from the Shadow Cabinet, the Policing Minister, will join us in just a moment. Tom Swarbrick here, 10:47.
This is LBC. This is LBC Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster.
Morning to you, 10:51 is the time. Paul's in Northern Ireland. Tom, the question remains, is a bad deal better than no deal? As a British citizen, I trust the government will do what's best for the people of the UK. Then Boris Johnson will be judged at the next election, he says. Let's talk and turn to Labour. Sarah Jones is Shadow Minister for Policing and the Fire Service and Labour MP for Croydon Central. Thank you very much for coming on the programme this morning, Sarah Jones. Let me first start with an issue on your brief when it comes to these deportation flights that we've seen. Priti Patel very, very clear in saying that those Labour MPs and celebrities who have criticised deportation flights have actually re-traumatised victims of those serious crimes. Do you agree that there are circumstances in which deportation is necessary?
Yes, so we always have there's a fundamental principle. If you're a British citizen, you commit a crime, you do the time in prison, and then you're released. If you're not a British citizen, there is a process. If it's a serious crime, usually over about a year in prison, that kind of level of seriousness, there is a process by which we as the state say, well, are we going to deport you back to your country of origin? And there is a court process that goes through, and people have rights to appeal, and that is absolutely right and proper. The issue that we had and we have is that when you look at some of the mistakes that were made in the Windrush scandal, where people who were British citizens were told they weren't British citizens, we're not confident, and nor is Wendy Williams, who did the review into this, that those lessons have been learned and that those systems are in place to make sure that doesn't happen. So what we question is whether or not actually the status of those people was right. Now, obviously, nasty criminals are nasty criminals, full stop. But we have a system in this country that if you're a British citizen, you stay here after you've done your crime. If you're a foreign national who has no right to be in this country, then we have a process,
Sure.
and we just want to make sure that's followed.
Is there evidence then that since the Windrush scandal broke, is there evidence that the British government have accidentally or otherwise deported British citizens to foreign countries?
Well, in that flight in question, the numbers went right down from about 50 to about 13. So clearly there were issues about the deportation of some of those
on that specific flight, I read that there were issues about modern slavery and whether people were victims of trafficking. And absolutely rightly, if you're a victim of modern slavery, you should not be being deported, in my view. But is there any evidence to suggest that we're seeing a second Windrush here?
What the evidence is that Wendy Williams, who did the review on the lessons learned, has said that she is concerned that those lessons haven't been put into place, that the changes in the systems haven't been put into place, and we can see that with things like the compensation schemes that haven't been paid out yet, are still rumbling on, and the processes are still there. I think on deportations and foreign criminals, I think there is another issue, which is that if the government really cared about this issue, they wouldn't be so cavalier with losing rights to the European arrest warrant and some of the databases that help us catch criminals that police are telling me they're really concerned about in this Brexit deal.
I'm delighted you've raised Brexit, because it was what I was going to come on to next. Which way is the Labour Party going to vote if we get a deal?
Well, I think the idea that we would say how we would vote on something of such national importance before even seeing it would be absurd. We know a couple of things. We know that the deal is going to be a lot thinner than what was promised, and we know that the government has completely failed to deliver what they said they would in terms of getting a deal done by July. Was the last time that the Prime Minister made a promise. So we massively sympathise with businesses who are trying to plan and just can't. But it would be irresponsible of us to say we would vote a certain way before we've even seen what the deal looks like.
I think that is understandable and fair, but it does therefore mean that the Labour Party would consider not voting for this particular deal when it comes back, and therefore taking us to no deal. How do you square that? Your leader is a man who campaigns to remain in the European Union.
Well, we know that no deal would be disastrous on many
So you can't not
fronts.
vote for this thing.
But there is, we cannot say, and it would be totally wrong, and you would call us out for it if we started saying we're going to vote a certain way on something when we have no idea what is going to be in it. We're not part of the negotiations. We don't know how they're going to land. The plates are shifting on this every day, as George Eustice has been saying. Oh well, everything will be fine, food will be fine. Oh well, if beef costs more, that's only a small part of the shopping. they're rowing back all the time on what they think is going to be possible, and now saying, oh, well, maybe we'll have to extend a bit and carry on.
So you can't vote for it until you see it, but you don't necessarily think it's going to be all that great. You can't vote against it because that would happen. No deal would come about then, and that would be pretty catastrophic in your view. So you're going to abstain.
We're going to see what it looks like, and that's right. And I think, what we also desperately want the government to do is to get this deal so we can have that done as promised, but also to give businesses the support they need at the moment during COVID, which the government is failing to do. I've got pubs in my constituency on their knees because the government's not supporting them properly. And then we need to look to the long term. And we've heard nothing. We've had a spending review that froze public sector pay. And that's it. How are we going to build our way as a country
some public sector
out some public sector pay? How are we going to build our way out of the debt that we've built up during COVID and become the country that we want to be? And I think the posturing and the internal market bill coming back tomorrow, all of these things do not give me hope that this government knows how to make us the best country we can be.
Let me ask you this finally. You're a London MP, you're the MP for Croydon Central. There's been a couple of instances over the weekend, particularly at Millwall's football ground, of booing players who took the knee to show solidarity for the Black Lives Matter campaign. I wonder if I could play you this. This is a clip from the former footballer, Dion Dublin, black English footballer, commenting on the booing that he heard. Have a listen.
People that don't like other people backing the Black Lives Matter have a problem with black people. To me, it says they're racist. And I don't think it's right. Millwall don't think it's right. But the minority have spoilt it.
Do you think people who don't take the knee are racist?
No, what I think is that during the COVID pandemic, the two issues that I've been contacted by constituents more than any other were Dominic Cummings running up to Durham and Black Lives Matter. I think the whole country was completely appalled at what happened in America and wants to see this country be a non-racist, equal place to live. And I think there is still racism in our country. I think.
Do you think it was on display yesterday? Do you think that's what that booing was about?
People booing at people taking the knee is not nice, and I think we need to make it really clear that we should respect people who have a position. We should expect people who take a view that they want to take the knee. I took the knee after.
You did?
After.
But it's not nice. But is it racist?
I think, of course, there's racism. There's been a huge problem of racism in football in terms of chanting against black footballers for many years. And to be fair, the vast majority of football fans aren't racist. And the football, there is a big push to try and stamp out racism in football. There's whole programs of activity about that. But we need to be on top of this and call it out when we see it. Absolutely, because we are not free of racism in this country, and we need to keep campaigning to try to make sure that these kind of things don't happen.
Sarah Jones, I'm grateful for your time. Thank you very much indeed. Shadow Minister for Policing and the Fire Service, Labour MP for Croydon Central. Thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme. So many of you want to come on to discuss where we are with Brexit this weekend, given the shouting that was reportedly happening in the corridors of power at 1:30 in the morning, given this new request by the French government. I want to come on to what the impacts of no deal actually might mean for those sectors that are to and from trading with the European Union most regularly. So if you're an HGV driver, how are you facing the prospect of a no-deal Brexit? If you export to the EU, are you having to go through customs clearance and sign new forms and all this red tape? If you work in the farming sector and the agricultural sector, how is a no deal going to impact you? We'll speak to the National Farmers Union after the news.
On your radio, on Global Player and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 11 o'clock, the Environment Secretary has told LBC food prices will go up if a trade deal can't be reached with the EU. The UK's Brexit negotiators are due in Brussels for discussions described as the last roll of the dice to strike an agreement. Both sides say significant differences remain on competition rules, fishing and governance. Speaking to Swarbrick on Sunday, George Eustice acknowledged food bills could rise.
Probably about 1.8% is what some of the modelling suggests. The important thing to recognise is that when it comes to the average shopping basket, there are vast numbers of products like bread and milk and many other things that we produce here, vegetables, potatoes and so on, that wouldn't be affected whether or not there's a trade agreement.
Preparations are being made for the largest scale immunisation programme in British history. Containers of coronavirus vaccines will be moved from secure locations to hospital hubs for the first jabs to be administered on Tuesday. People aged 80 and over, care home workers and NHS staff at higher risk will be the first in the queue. A survey suggests nearly 70% of people believe the UK's response to the pandemic has been confused and inconsistent. But the findings, based on research by King's College London, show more people still support than oppose the current approach. A 28-year-old man's been charged with the attempted murder of a baby in Blackpool. The 4-month-old girl is in a critical condition after she was taken to hospital with serious injuries on Thursday. Millwall supporters have been condemned for booing players who were taking the knee in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. The club had been hosting 2,000 home fans for the first time since March for their championship match with Derby County. Derby's caretaker manager Wayne Rooney says it was disappointing to see.
I was surprised. I think with everything what's been going on over recent months, I think it was very surprising, and everyone at Derby County Football Club, we took the knee, and no one condones that behaviour.
And Netflix has rejected suggestions The Crown should display a disclaimer at the start of episodes. Earlier this week, the Culture Secretary called for the royal drama to carry a message explaining that it's partly a work of fiction. The streaming firm says it has every confidence viewers already understand the context. And the weather, cloudy with patchy rain over northern England, Wales and the Midlands, mostly fine elsewhere, especially in western Scotland, a high of 7 Celsius. From Global's newsroom, I'm Thomas Watts.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC.
Very good morning to you. Just gone 11 o'clock. You're watching and listening to Swarbrick on Sunday here on LBC. I'm Tom Swarbrick. Very good to have your company this Sunday morning. We'll talk more in the next hour about the vaccine rollout. Can you believe it? The NHS is about to undertake one of its biggest peacetime logistical operations. And because of what's going on with Brexit, I'm afraid it's slightly moved to the back of the newspapers this morning. The vaccine rollout begins in earnest over the course of the next few days. The first group of people to be offered the vaccination include care home workers, and also people over the age of 80. You see on some of the front pages that Her Majesty the Queen has indicated that she will be taking the vaccine. She'll let us know when she's had it. But I wonder whether you feel that you too will be lining up to get the vaccine when it's available in the next few days. We'll come on to that and speak to the World Health Organization a little bit after the news at 12. But given the developments over the last 24 hours when it comes to those Brexit negotiations, the fact that they have not broken down, but are on the verge of breaking down, to be clear about it. The paper's full of speculation from insiders that the chances of getting a deal are now fewer than 50%. Michel Barnier heading back to Brussels. The Lord David Frost, the UK's negotiator, heading over there with him. So in the next 24 hours, they can talk still. But by Monday night, if there isn't anything coming forward, we could be in the position of Boris Johnson making a national announcement via the TV cameras from Downing Street that we are indeed going to no deal. What impact that will have, I want to get into over the course of the next hour or so. So if you are going to be personally affected by a no-deal Brexit, whether it's in your particular industry, whether it's going to affect your job and how you're able to do your job, I want to hear from you. 0345 6060 973, because to me it is clear that a no-deal Brexit will have immediate impact on businesses in this country. And as you heard from the Environment Secretary about half an hour or so ago, the government is making contingency plans to step in to even get goods from the French side of the Channel into the UK if there are problems at the French border. There are also political questions to ask about what the Labour Party is going to do with any
any deal that comes forward. We'll speak to the General Secretary of the USDOR Union in just a few moments. But Richard Burnett is the CEO of the Road Haulage Association. Thank you very much for coming on the programme this morning, Mr. Burnett. Just give us an overview, if you can, of what you expect to happen on January the 2nd if we go to no deal.
Well, it's going to be pretty chaotic, I think, to say the least, and there are a number of reasons. Part of no deal means that we've got to fill out customs declarations whether we get a deal or not. We have insufficient customs agents to be able to complete that paperwork. So businesses are not going to be ready in order to export to the EU because of that primary issue. We're also going to have market access issues as well. So for UK hauliers that are currently delivering into the EU, it means that they're going to have to use what are called ECMT permits. At the moment, we have unfettered access to the EU. But from the 1st of January, with no deal, it would mean we have to have ECMT permits. We've got 2,000 of those for the whole of the UK haulage market, and there are 39,000 trucks that go to Europe. So we have a significant problem straight away in terms of market access. Now, the government have been trying to say that that there will be a glide path for perhaps 6 months, even in the event of no deal. But this is going to have a significant constraint on our ability to be able to move product into the EU. But that primary issue... Sorry, Tom.
No, I was just going to say, so that is a way of trying to manage the difficulty with getting trucks into the EU, which is, of course, massively important for exporters and for business and for the EU market. It strikes me that getting stuff back out of the EU into this country is also massively critical when it comes to keeping the supermarket shelves topped up. The Environment Secretary said that their concern is that the French side of the border is not as ready as it should be. Does that match your experience?
Yes, it does, and I don't necessarily agree with what George Eustice said this morning. What he's failing to understand as well is that not just EU hauliers are concerned about coming to the UK because of a lack of flow through the short straits, but also food manufacturers who are servicing, the UK from the EU. We're also concerned about product being written off. Now, we've been dealing with European hauliers, pan-European hauliers, who are saying that those food manufacturers are talking about cutting food orders by 50% in January because they don't want to have to write that product off because it's going to be stuck in queues. So there isn't as much confidence from an EU perspective in terms of our ability in the event of a deal or without a deal to be able to trade in the way in which they're trading at the moment, and that's a significant issue as well.
So if you've got food rotting in the back of a lorry because it's waiting in a queue, the government say that they've got a government-procured service that can come in emergencies, lift the stuff that we desperately need out of those lorries onto boats or whatever and get it into the UK. Are you aware of the details of this system and how confident are you in it?
Well, we're aware of the details of the system, but I guess its primary usage is going to be for medicines. It's not going to be for food product. And, we've got an enormous amount of food that comes into the UK from the EU. 30% of our food, is brought in from the EU every year. So that's a significant amount. There's no way in terms of this additional service that would support I guess challenges and issues at the port in terms of product getting through.
A lot of people will be listening to this, Mr. Burnett, and saying, OK, these are problems, but they're not insurmountable problems. The idea that there's not going to be food on the shelves or that there's going to be a run on loo roll or meat, in the supermarkets in the run-up to no deal is Project Fear. What would you say to that?
Well, look, this isn't about Project Fear. As a trade association, we have to be very balanced. We have both Remainers and Brexiteers in terms of our membership. What we have to do is we have to spell out the practical operational implications of what is likely to happen because of these controls coming back into play. We haven't had to do customs declarations or paperwork for 37 years. We've seen a tripling of trade over that period of time. And yes, a no deal will have an effect on the balance of trade, and we don't know what that's going to look like, until we get into it. But these are significant issues. We're not scaremongering. We're just saying practically, when you flick a switch and you change an operation or you change a business process, it has consequences. And yes, we'll come through this. It may take us, 6 to 12 months, but there will be significant disruption during that period while industry rebalances and while the EU rebalances as well.
And in that 6 to 12 months, what do you I mean, give us a sort of an everyday consequence, a real-world consequence of that disruption. And I wonder, too, secondly, whether or not you fear that there are going to be job losses in your particular industry as a result.
Well, I think what you have to do is you have to concentrate on the detail, and you look at the flows. You can see this week what the flows do when they're slowed down. The French frontier police actually started doing passport checks this week, and we had 5-mile queues in Kent. That was probably a demonstration from the French in terms of what that impact could be. We're going to see that sort of impact, from January if we don't get a deal. And we don't, we're not able to get on top of this paperwork. So we're going to see a slowing of the supply chain. We'll see some businesses unable to trade with the EU because they will not be able to complete their paperwork because they can't find customs agents. So that's going to have an impact. And we also may see a secondary impact in the UK in terms of volume coming from the EU into the UK, into our supply chains, both manufacturing and retail. If that slows down and stops, then that's going to have a secondary impact in terms of jobs, certainly within the logistics sector, but also, within manufacturing and retail as well.
Richard, good to talk to you. Sounds like you've got a lot of work on your plate. Thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. Richard Burnett, CEO of the Road Haulage Association. Let's come on to some of the politics of no deal. Paddy Lillis joins us. He's the General Secretary of USDOR, the Union of Shop, Distributive and Allied Workers. Thank you very much for coming on the programme this morning, Mr Lillis. We've heard from a member of the Shadow Cabinet this morning saying that Labour are going to take their time in looking at the deal before publicly stating whether they will back it or not. What do you think the Labour Party ought to do?
Well, look, firstly, the need to look at the details around this, but we're clear as a trade union. Jobs, workers' rights and the Good Friday Agreement are paramount for us. And a no deal would be a disaster. We've just heard from Richard Burnett there from the Haulage Association. I totally agree with him. A no deal will lead to tariffs and customs checks that will result in log jams around our ports. And certainly, I don't want to be alarmist, but I have real concerns that the hold-up in food products at Dover and other ports could lead to shortages on our shelves in the supermarkets. Just look at the start of the coronavirus crisis. We saw shortages of certain items. You just mentioned there, toilet rolls, the pasta, eggs, flour. I'm seeing the panic buying, even though we had stocks and distributions. I mean, this is going to see delays at ports, and it's going to certainly cause problems in terms of imports. If you just look at it, the British Retail Consortium saying that with a no deal, it could cost up to an additional £3 billion a year in tariffs, which puts bills on the food. Ultimately, the consumers pay for that. And in the road haulage industry, we just heard Richard there. I mean, look, there's a 400 million truck movements a year into the UK. That's huge. And these hold-ups are going to cost a minimum of £500 per truck. Who's going to pay for this? The consumer's going to pay for this long term as well. So we've got real problems around that, and that's going to lead to job losses. And of course, then with workers' rights, which is one of our big concerns. We have a no deal. Then we have an unregulated market. We're not following through with Europe. Our holidays, our pay, paternity, maternity, all the things that we have got from the rights from the European Union are at risk. And the retail sector, has had
they're only, to be fair, Mr Lillis, they're only at risk if there's a government in power at a particular moment that puts them at risk. That is for the Parliament to decide, as it would be under a Labour government or any other kind of government. Let me just bring you back to the point that you were making then about the difficulties of no deal. It sounds as if it's something that you just would not put up with. You do not think is a good idea. You think it would be catastrophic. Why then are the Labour Party not saying firmly, we are going to back this deal, do you think?
Well, I think the Labour Party is looking at what is the deal, what is the outcome of the deal. Look, we all, the trade union movement in the main, along with the Labour Party, campaigned to stay in the European Union. We've moved on from that now. We've accepted we're out. And the deal is now what's important. But look, just go back to one thing for us. You just take, in terms of the retail sector, as I said earlier, it's had a torrid year this year with coronavirus. And even with this, We're going to see now that the duty free for tourists is going to be lost. Look at the lost revenue to retailers that's going to cost. I see
your point, Mr Lillis. I totally see your point, and we'll come on to what it is going to mean for farmers in a few moments. But just coming back to the political point, your pressure then on the Labour Party and the leadership of the Labour Party is to come out and clearly back this deal, to work with the government, because there are plenty in the upper echelons of the Labour Party at the moment, in the Shadow Cabinet, who say that would be a catastrophic thing for the Labour Party to do, to be seen to vote with the government and allow their deal to go through.
Well, look, voting with the government doesn't mean we fully support it. And no deal will be catastrophic for the country. So a deal, I think, is going to have to be supported and worked upon in the coming years. And no deal is going to leave us wide open to market forces. We're going to be left with no protections in terms of employment rights, tariffs in the country, etc. So
would abstaining be acceptable?
Look, I've never been a fan of abstaining. Abstaining, sitting on the fence. You either vote for or you vote against. And I'm saying voting against is clearly devastating for the country.
Can't accuse you of sitting on the fence this morning, Mr. Lillis. Thank you very much indeed. Paddy Lillis is the General Secretary of the USDOR Union, the Union of Shop, Distributive and Allied Workers. 0345 6060 973 is my number. We'll speak to the chair of the NFU, the National Farmers Union, in just a moment here too. Tom Swarbrick on LBC. It's 11:17.
LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
11:20 is the time. I have to offer enormous apology to Alexandra in Nymington, who's been waiting, I think, probably about half an hour to come on the radio. Alexandra, thank you so much for being patient with us. Tell us your view on whether or not we should go to no deal now.
Well, can I just have a quick word first?
Absolutely.
When I rang an hour ago, I just asked your producer, is this too simple a question? If EU place all the tariffs, 10%, 50% on our goods, can't we just do the same to them?
Yep.
And then you started talking to someone about food. And again, we've got some of the best meat in the world. I'm just wondering if our farmers could step up if we needed more food within our own country to be grown. And number 3, fish. I'm 75. I remember those cod wars. They were awful. As you said, Tom, I think gunboats were brought in the end. But Iceland solved it by eventually putting a 150-mile radius around their island, I suppose it would be, and there wasn't any more problems since. Couldn't we do the same there? Go ahead, Tom.
Well, can I, Alexandra, you've been very polite, thank you. I just wonder whether that's worth it. Is it worth it for all the hassle and difficulty and arduousness there's going to be in the course of the next 6 to 12 months if we do have a no-deal Brexit? Do you think that in, 10, 15, 20 years' time, the next generation will look back at the decision made to go to no-deal and think actually it was the right one?
Tom, I do agree it is scary. I did vote out. In the 70s, I voted in because it was common market policy, and you'll probably, or perhaps you don't know, it was much more food trade, agriculture. Yeah. But over the years, I do, watch politics shows and read the papers, and they, EU, have taken over so much of our lives with laws and rules. I thought, no, I want to be an independent country, but I will accept it is very scary if we go to no deal, but it takes two to tango, and it looks like they're not going to give in. We're not going to give in. So,
in a word, then, Alexandra.
Pardon?
In a word, then, do you regret voting to leave if we come out with no deal?
No.
Okay. Listen, great to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time, and apologies for keeping you waiting for so long. Alexandra in Lymington, come to more of your calls in just a moment. I'm joined by Minette Batters, the President of the National Farmers Union, on the point about growing for Britain. Thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme, Minette. Just on Alexandra's point there about farmers stepping up, do you foresee a time when actually the majority of goods that would otherwise be going to the EU have to stay in the UK because the tariff applied to them is so high under no deal?
Without doubt. I mean, the tariffs on agriculture are so high that in a no-deal scenario, we are priced out of the European market. So that is a big problem for sectors like lamb, the sheep sector, whereby we are the second largest producer of sheep meat in the world, and 30% of our lamb goes into the European market. So if you're priced out of that market, you've obviously got that 30% here. Now, you could say, and many people do say, right, well, we'll stop importing New Zealand lamb. We won't have any of it coming in. By law, through the WTO, we have to honour our commitment to the TRQ, that's the tariff rate quota of what we currently have out of the EU. So we've already agreed to continue the same amount of lamb coming in from New Zealand. And of course, we want to have a free trade agreement with New Zealand and with Australia, which of course is a big exporter of lamb as well. So it's far more complex. You can't have Fortress Britain and liberalised trade. I mean, that's the whole challenge of all of this. And of course, it's a vital export market for us with 500 million people in the EU market.
Mr. Eustice was on with me earlier. I'm sure you've had lots of conversations with him over the last few years or so. He has said that if the EU are unwilling to do a tariff-free trade agreement, then we would, as a country, have to review what our response to that would be, and we would redouble our efforts to open new markets for lamb, like the US and the Middle East. What currently is going to the US and the Middle East, and could it be redoubled?
It could be, but these things take time. They don't happen in a 12-month period. That is an absolute certainty. So I'm not saying that there are not new market opportunities out there, but they do take time to be negotiated and agreed. And of course, you have to look to the situation with Australia, which I just mentioned. We probably will agree a trade agreement with Australia next year. Agriculture is a big part of that trade deal. Now, they will be aggressive negotiators. They will want free market access for both lamb and beef, much lower costs of production. So I accept there are new market opportunities, but there are also challenges with the countries that we are doing those trade negotiations with. And don't forget, those countries are already aggressively onto those markets, negotiating trade deals as well. So it's a challenging picture.
It's an understatement. Mr. Eustice also suggested that that actually British farmers are going to get as much support, if not more, than they currently receive with the Common Agricultural Policy. Is that your experience?
Well, no. The whole focus of going to a world of public monies for public goods is about investing in environmental delivery. Now, we feel that, this has to be based on sustainable food production, but it is a game changer in that the support mechanisms will be taken away from food production into environmental delivery. Now, that's a global first. The whole reason for investing in agriculture across the world is basically to keep food prices low, to stop food price spikes. We're stepping away from that commitment. And of course, COVID, massive austerity across the country, the public purse never been more challenged. I'm very mindful of that. So the policy is actually going away from food production into investment in the environment. All farmers want to be able to earn a fair return out of the marketplace. That's what they want to see happen.
Well, and let me come on to then the sort of the real world nuts and bolts consequences of this, because it's all very well talking about the Common Agricultural Policy and legislative changes that could come in, but actually, do you anticipate that in no deal there would be a shortage of food on the shelves, that British farmers would not be able to grow to put it on the shelves because of commitments already made under law under the WTO? That my listeners are going to face difficulties in buying food.
I don't see why they should, because we import about 40% of our food from the European Union. We will continue to do that. The big judgment call and the challenge for government is if it chooses to keep the reciprocal tariff effectively in place, the global tariff. So in a no-deal scenario, the EU will say, right, okay, well, you have these taxes. These are the tariffs that you have to pay. And there are high tariffs. I mean, if we look at lamb, we're talking about 62% tariff. Beef, we're talking about 85% tariff. Big taxes. Now, are we going to say, actually, if you're going to access our market, you're going to have to pay those high tariffs? Now, I know George Eustice feels strongly that we should keep the global tariff in place. But where does that put food inflation? Who is going to pick up the cost in all of this? Because government will be very concerned about seeing food prices rise. And of course,
wouldn't the cost equal out? I mean, I suppose it would only equal out if you had equal trade, but that doesn't seem to be the case.
Absolutely. So it's whether, we could choose to lower the tariff wall and say to the EU, actually, do you know what, bring it on in, we don't mind. You can't just do that to the EU. We'd have to lower the tariff wall to the rest of the world and say, bring it on in. That would have a catastrophic effect on British agriculture, because we would be back to a level of much lower self-sufficiency, because we would obviously be subsumed with cheaper food coming in from all over the world. So it's, it all rests on that global tariff and what we decide to do with that in a no-deal scenario. But, that is going to mean cost. It's going to mean friction. And who ultimately is going to pay for that?
And can I add one final question? I'm afraid it's a bit of a grim one for a Sunday morning, although it's approaching lunchtime, so apologies if people are put off by it. But I've seen it. There's been suggestions over in the run-up to a potential no deal that there are going to have to be many, many hundreds of, potentially thousands of sheep culled early on the basis that we wouldn't be able to get them across in time. Is that your understanding? And if so, how many?
We cannot underestimate, no matter how strong the ideological drivers are, we cannot underestimate the importance of, we will have to, at some stage, agree a trading relationship with the EU. Now, my commitment to the sheep farmers of this country is we will do everything to keep those flows going. And I do not want to see any slaughtering of the national sheep flock. I'm wholly opposed to that. And I want to make sure that we keep market access going. We do continue to find a good trading relationship.
Because the government have got abattoirs on standby. They say that they've got abattoirs on standby if needs be, that they can start getting these things culled early. You would be opposed to that?
I would be opposed to that. We've also got a strong commitment for them to keep these trade flows going. It's not peak lamb season when we leave, if we leave without a deal at the end of December. There is time, and I think sort of scaremongering about slaughtering of the national flock is premature. I remain committed to the fact that we need to have a deal, we need to agree a deal, and I hope that will happen. And that is my focus, to work with government on achieving it.
Minette Batters, really grateful to you for your time. Thank you for coming on the programme. You're the president of the National Farmers Union. Interesting, this point from Tobias here on 84850. Tom, I think we should be focusing less on our meat and fish industries and set ourselves up for more long-term success. By 2040, it is largely accepted that over half of our meat will come from non-slaughtered animals, i.e. meat alternatives and cultivated. Well, you're absolutely right. That is the prediction. I understand farmers and trawlers' concerns with their industries. The government should help these firms transfer to more sustainable options. After all, aren't we undergoing a green revolution, suggests Tobias. It's actually a good point about the change in production of in this instance, meat to becoming more cultured meat, i.e. Actual meat that is born out of the cells of an animal rather than the culling of an animal, which has already been given license in places like Singapore. But that takes a long time. And it goes to that question that I asked earlier, actually, of in the short term, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, the difficulties that come with no deal, is that put to one side on the basis of in 10, 15 years' time, perhaps, people look back and say, OK, well, that was a difficulty. We did find ourselves in the shtuck for a bit, but actually it was worth it. Is it going to be worth it? In what area is it going to be worth it? 0345 6060 973. We'll talk more in a few moments about the incident at Millwall's football ground yesterday, the booing of players taking the knee. We'll speak to show racism and the red card in a few moments. Tom Swarbrick here, 11:32. News headlines this Sunday morning. Here's Thomas Watts.
Speaking to LBC, the Environment Secretary has insisted there will be no extension to the Brexit transition period, which expires at the end of this month. The UK's chief negotiator, Lord Frost, has just arrived in Brussels for last-ditch trade talks with the EU. 50 hospitals have been chosen to serve as the hubs for administering the COVID-19 vaccine in England. The first jabs will be given on Tuesday to people aged 80 and over, care home staff and NHS workers at higher risk. And the golf commentator and former player Peter Alliss has died at the age of 89. The voice of golf won more than 20 tournaments during his career and played on 8 Ryder Cup teams. And the weather, cloudy with patchy rain over northern England, Wales and the Midlands, mostly fine elsewhere, especially in the west of Scotland, a high of 7 Celsius.
This is LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
To your calls in just a few moments, but I do want to touch on what happened down at the Den, the new Den, Millwall's ground on yesterday afternoon, with the players taking a knee and the booing that ensued from some members of the few thousand who were inside the new Den, and the criticism of Millwall that has flown in since. Jed Greby joins us, Chief Executive of Show Racism the Red Card. Thank you for joining us this morning, Mr. Greby. Your thoughts on what happened at Millwall yesterday and the booing that took place?
Well, given that the Millwall players had put out a very strong statement before this, maybe even thinking that booing would take place by a section of their fans, highlighting that the taking of the knee was about anti-racism, but it was also about diversity and equality. I think it's even more shocking that their players would the fans would disrespect their own players' stand and boo the taking of the knee. Sure, it's my card of condemning the minority of Millwall fans who did that and asking the club. I mean, there was only a small group of fans allowed in the stadium. These were the privileged few. We don't want them coming back in and doing the same again when the players take the knee in a couple of weeks.
So the club should identify and ban those people who booed?
I don't think it should be banned for life or anything like that, but I think they should not have the privilege of going in the ground when there's limited number of space for fans. You wouldn't want
do we know
fans.
what exactly the fans were booing? Because it's not. Is it completely clear to you that they were booing the idea of equality and diversity, or were they booing the notion of Black Lives Matter as a political movement whose motives they don't agree with?
Well, the players made that quite clear that they were backing the Black Lives Matter movement, not Black Lives Matter UK, and they made it quite clear they were backing an anti-racism stand. So I think the fans who booed were very aware that they were booing their own players making an anti-racism stand. And they need to look...
So they're racist. Are the fans racist?
We would never label anybody as racist because it sounds like a permanent definition of what they are. But certainly the fans who booed that were not advancing the anti-racism cause. Millwall have done a tremendous amount as a football club. We're not blaming Millwall Football Club for this. But Church Red Card would say Millwall Football Club are one of the better clubs in the UK in not only talking the talk about anti-racism, but delivering it in the community. So they'll be just as disappointed as we are, Church Red Card, at these fans, minority of fans, giving them a racist reputation.
Do you think you have to take the knee, or you should take the knee, in order to show you're not a racist?
No, we wouldn't. The players were quite entitled to do what they want to do, and this is player-led, don't forget. Person Red Cards would never tell somebody they have to take the knee. It should be a voluntary thing. It should be something you want to do to fight racism, but it's not enough. I mean, taking the knee will not get rid of racism. It's a symbolic gesture. We believe it has to be backed up, as it is at Millwall, with education, working with our organisation, Racism Red Card. So it's symbolic, but we wouldn't want anybody to take it who doesn't want to take it. I don't know any player that's been forced to take it.
OK. Mr. Greby, listen, good to talk to you. Thank you for your time. Jed Greby, Chief Executive of Show Racism the Red Card. 2012, let's come to your calls. Here's James in Glasgow. Whoa, thank you, Mr. Greby. Here's James in Glasgow. Hi there, James. James, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, you can hear me okay.
Hi there, James.
Tom?
Oh, I don't know if I can hear James. James, are you there?
Tom, can you hear me now?
Hello, loud and clear, my friend. Apologies.
Sorry, mate. Good morning, Tom, anyway.
Morning.
I think the whole scenario with leaving Europe's insanity, what I was going to say was that I remember when we had our first referendum for independence, and one of the things that changed my mind was when David Cameron came out and he said that if Scotland left the UK, then we would be put out of Europe. We wouldn't be in the European, family. So that was one of the things that changed my mind, and I voted against leaving the UK. But now I went the other way because the Conservative Party have taken us out of Europe, But there was always one question I used to say.
Well, hang on. The Conservative Party have been in government when the referendum was offered and when the vote to leave happened. Do you think that they should have ignored the result of the referendum?
No, I just don't think the referendum should have actually happened because there was much
and that's
lies.
fine, James. You can say that's fine. You can rail against the things that have taken place, but we've got to deal with where we are now. So You're not saying that Brexit shouldn't happen?
Well, I don't like it, but it's happening now anyway. And I think it's like saying that the union, the UK union, is so great, and the union with Europe was terrible.
So you think it's going to break up? It could break up the UK. This.
Well, Tom, I'll definitely be voting if we get another referendum. I'll definitely be voting to leave because I like being a European. My family.
All right. Well, James, just hang on the line. James, just hang on the line there because I want to get Andrew in as well. Andrew's in Halifax. Hi, Andrew.
Hello, Tom.
James, pretty clear that this is a bad idea. Yeah. It's going to break up the union, and why are we doing it?
Well, first of all, with regard to Scotland, if Boris is soft enough to submit to a second referendum, I'll be on the train up to Scotland to campaign to keep the union, because I am not prepared to see a union that millions of men in uniform have fought and died for to be broken up by the likes of James and these other rabid nationalists. I'm just not prepared to tolerate that. There is no comparison between splitting up a nation that has been together for 300 years and leaving a trading bloc that we've been a member of for less than 50. No comparison whatsoever. That's
James, you're a rabid nationalist.
Well, what I'd like to say is that the union was actually started, was it not, through finance rather than bullets? I realise my grandfather was killed in the First World War. My dad was a Royal Marine in the Second World War, from 39 to 45. So I know where he's coming from, but the actual union was started by business, was it not? Finances. To try and
but you don't feel, James, that the EU has morphed, that the union has morphed from being a trading bloc to being a political institution?
Well, I kind of like the idea rather than all this money getting spent in defence, which he's announced, because I think Britain's going to be suffering big time. I think this is a waste of money. I know people's against it, but I thought it was a great idea. Like all these 27 countries. I mean, who's going to attack 27 countries in Europe? A European army.
Andrew, that's a good point. It's a good point. Don't you want to be part of an army or a military that we be working with in terms of a European army, Andrew?
Me? Well, I mean, I'm all for cooperation with Europe. I'm all for trade with Europe. But my assessment of these ongoing trade talks is a very simple benchmark. One, that Canada does 70% of its trade with the United States, and Canada was America's largest goods export market in 2019. Unless our autonomy with regard to the EU is similar or greater than what Canada or the United States enjoy together, then I'm afraid it's got to be no deal, because I did not vote to be a vassal state of the EU. And I think, Tom, that the whole agenda here, and I think a lot of leavers have said the same, is that the idea from a lot of the Remainer class is to keep us as closely tied in to Europe with an idea maybe 10 years down the line to try and take us back in. And I think this thing...
I just don't think it's... I really don't... Andrew, I do not think that it is as ideologically hell-bent as that. It's a pragmatic thing that means that businesses can actually start to move goods across the border without any massive tariffs applied to it, or without stuff rotting in the queues.
Well, that's fine. And as I said, I am all for that. But primarily, this was
that's
about
not what
British
no deal
sovereignty.
would mean.
Well, it would, but if the alternative is to keep the UK in the regulatory orbit of Europe to a far greater degree than what Canada and the United States enjoy, even though our volume of trade with them and then with us is less, then I think that would amount to a very poor deal. And can I just say as well, Tom, that when I see the coffins of young men coming back through Royal Wootton Bassett, they're draped in the Union flag. They're not draped in the English flag or the Scottish flag. They gave their lives to the United Kingdom. And one of the reasons I so detest Scottish and Irish separatism is that they're prepared to sully their sacrifice for their own ends. And I think that is outrageous.
Well, OK, Andrew, thank you. James, thank you to you as well. 0345 6060 973. It is one part of Brexit that we haven't actually touched on that much this morning, to be fair, is the possible breakup of the United Kingdom as a result. This is only going to further calls for from the Scot Nats. And it's also, I'm afraid, going to mean that they will do rather better in these May elections than even their own wildest dreams could have predicted if we do leave with no deal. So implacably opposed are many people in Scotland to doing so. Come to more of your calls in a few moments. Tom Swarbrick here. It's 11:47.
Eddie Mair on LBC.
Mark Drakeford, the First Minister of Wales. Is it responsible to say to people within these bubbles, no social distancing?
Well, I think that is how households behave, isn't it?
But is it responsible of you to say it?
Doing it in the way we've agreed between the four governments is an attempt to offer people a Christmas in a way that recognises the continued threat the coronavirus poses.
And who will be to blame when people die in January? Will it be you and your colleagues who set the rules, or individuals who acted irresponsibly?
I'm afraid I don't think it's a sensible way to frame the question.
I can imagine, but it's the question, isn't it?
Eddie Mair, Monday to Friday from 4 p.m. LBC. This is LBC, Swarbrick on Sunday, with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster. Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850.
48 hours from V-Day we are, apparently, according to the papers. That is Vaccine Day, the day the vaccine starts to come out. Wednesday is day one of the vaccine dose. If you are aged 80 or over, if you are a frontline health and social care worker, you've got the opportunity to start to get your way out of this thing by lining up to get a jab on Wednesday when it becomes available. And I just wanted to know whether you will be. If you fall into any of those categories, frontline health and social care worker, work in a care home, and you're aged 80 or over, are you going to be getting this thing on Wednesday? It would seem like Her Majesty is up for it. Juan is going to get one's jab, but one will tell us when she's had it. It doesn't look like she's going to be first in the line to have it, but it's important that people who are in the public eye, and then there's no one more in the public eye than Her Majesty the Queen, who is qualifying to be able to get the vaccine, that takes it, is there? I mean, what more of a message do you need to send to people that it is those who we look at and look up to, perhaps, in certain regards, who are going to get the vaccine and going to shout to the rooftops about having got the vaccine? 0345 6060 973. If you find yourself with the possibility of getting it next week, are you going to? We'll speak to the World Health Organization after the news at 12. Steve's in Romford. Hi there, Steve.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. A no-deal a deal is going to be a disaster. A no-deal is going to be, well, worse than a disaster, if you like. And the reason I say that is, obviously if we have a no deal, there's going to be tariffs involved. But even if we have a deal, it's still going to be a disaster, and I'll tell you why. I bring in around 500 of those big lorries that you see from Europe delivering to people in the UK every year. At the present moment in time, it's very difficult to even get a company in Europe that even wants to bring a truck into the UK. Once Brexit happens, it's going to be a disaster. And I tell you why. It's at the present moment in time, lorries, and not just for me, for many other companies as well, they come into the UK full of product, delivered in the UK on a Monday and Tuesday, pick up from companies in the UK to deliver back to Europe on a Wednesday, Thursday, back into Europe the following Monday, Tuesday. When Brexit happens, those trucks, when they arrive in the UK, they're going to be stuck for a day, 2 days, could be even longer. And don't forget, it's not just the UK. France is going to have exactly the same problems. When the trucks come from the UK to France, they've got exactly the same problems. They've also got
people are tied up in red tape, Steve. I understand the red tape argument. People are going to have to deal with that pretty quickly and get ahead of that in order for those queues to be to go down and for the stuff to get across quickly. But there's no one is really suggesting that the EU is going to stop trading with the UK or stop sending their stuff into our marketplace. That we're going to stop wanting EU-made goods and products. No one's suggesting that. It just might be a bit tricky for a bit.
No, nobody's saying that, and I'm not saying that. Me, for one, personally, the companies I deal with in Europe, the last thing I want is them not to be supplying Europe. UK, they want to supply Europe. So
Steve, hang on. To be really cynical and possibly even a bit unfair about this, it may be that you find yourself and your business in a bit of difficulty because of this, with a deal or without. That it's difficult for you, the customs checks and everything else. But there are many, many millions of people who see great benefits from certainly having a deal, but even without a deal. And actually those benefits would outweigh the inconvenience that you and your business is suffering.
Well, the reason you're right, because they have no idea what the repercussions are going to be. And all I'm saying is my goods at the present moment in time that I bring in, okay, where the transport, let's just say for an argument's sake, is €2,000. Next year it's going to be €4,000. So that has to go onto the price. Secondly, if you've got tariffs, that has to go onto the price. So
well, look, Steve, I mean, we heard it. Listen, you heard it here. I mean, the Environment Secretary on this programme saying food prices will go up in the event of no deal. I thank you for your call and wish you luck with your business. Eileen's in Hendon this morning. Eileen.
Hiya. So I got my hair cut, so I'm not jealous of the lettuce anymore.
Oh, very good news.
Yeah, I'm going to have my hair cut again.
I probably need to explain that to listeners who didn't hear the conversation that we had on my late night programme. But you know what, Eileen? Time is short, but I'm delighted you got your hair cut.
I'm going to get a cut again on Tuesday because I'm out again. So, Tom, my message to the Europeans, especially the French, is in my mother's wonderful words. She's no longer with us, unfortunately. But when she was challenged, she would say in French, "Un malin, malin et demi." So let's not be wimps. Let's not talk about the prices are going to go up. They've already gone up. I have noticed it. I'm a pensioner. What I was paying 89p for, I now pay £1.45, just to give you one example. So let's not do any scaremongering, because we're going to get people flowing into the supermarkets and emptying the shelves all over again.
I don't think, Eileen, it is scaremongering to try and look at the genuine consequences of coming out of the European Union without a trading deal. And at the moment, that would be tariffs slapped on us by the EU and on the EU by us. And that has a cost to people.
Okay, so when I was working, I worked in the frozen food potato market, and we were disadvantaged because raw potatoes coming in from Europe were subsidised by their governments, whereas our government didn't subsidise our farmers. And so when we were trying to compete against foreign trade, it was very difficult.
Well, look, Eileen, I'm not going to argue with you that the Common Agricultural Policy has been very, very difficult and not particularly helpful for farmers, some farmers in this country. But we need to have a set of circumstances with the EU that means that those farmers don't go out of business. Listen, good luck with your haircut on Tuesday. Thank you very much for your call. Martin in Cambridge, Tom, Remainers had this in the bag with the May deal. But no, they thought they could overturn the largest vote in our history, all very Trumpian. Martin, no. Evan's in Slough. Evan.
Hi, Tom. Your last caller was talking about red tape, the red tape costs and quotas. So ongoing red tape costs. We know that the UK government spent $8.1 billion this year on Brexit preparation. So we're going to look at additional admin costs. In addition to that, quotas. We were looking at, for example, the ECMT permits, where only 1 in 4 lorries will get a permit to get into the EU. So that will affect how much trade we can actually export to the EU. That impacts UK jobs. That raises costs. That raises prices.
Well, this is why we've got to get, I think we have got to get to a deal, and hopefully in the coming hours, and it is literally the coming hours, we'll be able to announce on LBC that via the government that they say that they have got one with the EU. Stay tuned this weekend. Evan, thank you. 2 days, 48 hours to V-Day. The vaccine rollout begins next week, the largest NHS operation in peacetime history. Will you get the jab?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at midday. The UK's chief Brexit negotiator has arrived in Brussels for last-ditch talks on a trade deal with the EU. Ministers have warned discussions are still in a very difficult position on fishing rights and competition rules. A call between Boris Johnson and the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen failed to break the deadlock yesterday. Former Conservative leader Lord Howard has told Swarbrick on Sunday on LBC an agreement is still possible.
The vast majority of the things which have needed to be discussed are agreed. 98%, we're told, has been agreed, and the text has been agreed. So actually, if, as I devoutly hope will be the case, a sensible agreement is reached, I don't think there'll be a problem in getting it ratified before the end of the year.
Minette Batters is president of the National Farmers Union. She's told LBC producers would struggle to adapt to World Trade Organization rules under a no-deal outcome.
The tariffs on agriculture are so high that in a no-deal scenario, we are priced out of the European market. So that is a big problem for sectors like lamb, the sheep sector, whereby we are the second largest producer of sheep meat in the world.
Final preparations are being made to administer coronavirus vaccines across the UK from Tuesday. 50 hospitals have been chosen as immunisation hubs in England. People aged 80 and over, care home staff and NHS workers at higher risk will be first in the queue. The maximum jail term for animal cruelty in Scotland has increased from 1 to 5 years. New measures in force from today also give courts the ability to impose unlimited fines. Millwall say they are dismayed after some fans booed players taking the knee in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. Supporters were back in their home ground for the first time in months for a championship match against Derby. Sarah Jones is Shadow Policing Minister and Labour MP for Croydon Central. She's told Swarbrick on Sunday her mailbag is full of concerns about racism.
During the COVID pandemic, the two issues that I've been contacted by constituents more than any other were Dominic Cummings running up to Durham and Black Lives Matter. I think the whole country wants to see this country be a non-racist, equal place to live. And I think there is still racism in our country. People booing at people taking the knee is not nice.
Peter Allis, who became known as the voice of golf after his playing career, has died at the age of 89. He won more than 20 tournaments during his career and played on 8 Ryder Cup teams. And the weather. Cloudy with patchy rain over northern England, Wales and the Midlands. Mostly fine elsewhere, especially in western Scotland. A high of 7 Celsius. From Global's newsroom, I'm Thomas Watts.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC.
Very good afternoon to you. Just gone midday on Sunday afternoon. You're listening to Swarbrick on Sunday here on LBC. I'm Tom Swarbrick. Very, very good to have your company this afternoon. We've been talking a lot about Brexit, as you can well imagine, given the developments over the last 24 hours or so. Those negotiators now back in Brussels. Lord David Frost, the UK's chief negotiator, in Brussels this morning, ready for those talks to continue. They've got till Monday night. But, you know, the time frame does push on this thing, doesn't it? We've seen it before. There was at one stage, we were meant to have a deal agreed by July in order for it to be able to be ratified by both parliaments. At the moment, we've got about 26 days to go, and it's still not been done. But we'll keep across that for you here on LBC, so any developments, you will hear it first here. I want to talk about the vaccine, because there are just 48 hours to go until the vaccine rollout now begins. The breakthrough Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine that should help reclaim our lives once enough of us have had it. We've got 357 million doses that have been ordered by the government. We have the first 800,000 in the country, safely stored at -70, to begin to go to some of the places, the 50 NHS hubs. They're going to be used to start doling this vaccine out. The Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation has issued the priority list for phase 1 of the rollout of the vaccine. So, if you are aged 80 and over, if you are a frontline health and social care worker, and if you're resident in a care home for older adults, ladies and gentlemen, you are first in line to get your ticket out of this thing. 0345 6060 973. If you fall into those categories, if you are part of the phase 1 first option of taking the vaccine from Tuesday, are you going to do it? Or does granddad, whomever, take a bit more persuading to be first in line to get the vaccine? And if so, how are you persuading them to do so? 0345 6060 973. We'll speak to the chair of the British Medical Association's GP committee in just a few moments. First, Margaret Harris joins us from the World Health Organization. Thank you very much for being there for us this afternoon, Ms. Harris. Let me ask you first about the approval of this vaccine, because there was some discussion in the week from Dr. Fauci of the American CDC that the UK had done this in a way that wasn't particularly careful. Do you agree?
Good afternoon. Every country has their regulators. So some don't have that infrastructure, but the selection, the regulatory body belongs to each country, and each country requests the information from the vaccine producers. They request information on efficacy, safety, and how it's manufactured. So these ones that you've got coming now are coming specifically from Belgium, and that's what your regulators have looked at.
But do you agree that
it's a difficulty, perhaps, that the UK has approved this so quickly. People are asking questions as to how it is the UK have approved this so quickly, and Dr. Fauci suggesting it may have been careless.
It's the availability of the data. So, for instance, some of the data that the regulators looked at was not data that was provided to us. So when we get the data, we will look at it too, and we will eventually, when we've seen all the data that we want, we'll do something called an emergency use listing, which enables countries that don't have the same sort of regulatory structure that the UK has to apply that. So it does depend what data was provided. Now, it is different in different jurisdictions. And as I said, this was specifically for batches from Belgium, because one of the critical things is looking at the manufacturing practices. So you authorize something as a country based on what you know about how it's being produced in a particular place.
But are you, as the World Health Organization, satisfied that Britain has made the right call in getting this out the door now?
Well, we're seeing a number of countries already doing mass rollouts based on their licensing in their countries. What's really, really important for us now is that everyone who gets the vaccine is followed properly, and that the research, and that by research I mean is the surveillance, the information about how protective it is. We know it's protective in the short term. We don't know how protective it is in the long term. We want to know about any adverse events. They may be not related to the vaccine, but we want to hear about it early and investigate it early. So what's critical for us is that level of surveillance, that level of following up continues.
Has the World Health Organization had discussions with individual governments, including the UK, about the way in which this is being rolled out? Not just logistically, but also the people who would get it first. In this country, it's going to be care home residents, staff, and those over 80.
Yes, indeed. Those discussions have been going on for months, actually. So quite some time we have a group called the Strategic Advisory Group, SAGE, like you have a SAGE, but it's for vaccination in our case, and it's for the world. And they looked at exactly that. Who should be getting it, where, when, and how? The other thing we've been really working very hard to do is work with.
And sorry, just before I let you come on to that, Ms. Harris, sorry to interrupt, but has the UK government gone with your suggestion?
Yes, we had high-risk groups. The two groups that we really identified were exactly the most vulnerable, but also the healthcare workers, the frontline workers, the people who. So you've got two different groups. The elderly and people with underlying conditions are most likely to get sick and most likely to need hospitalisation. The healthcare workers, of course, are facing the virus every day. So those were the two top groups.
Have you come up with a figure or a series of figures as part of your advisory group about what percentage of the population needs to have had the vaccine in order for COVID to have nowhere else to go?
Oh, yes, that's the question that is often asked. Now, this will be different, actually, in different countries because so we wouldn't just put a firm percentage number.
No.
What we will look at is where your virus is and how it's being spread. So it's actually spread differently in different countries, but we do know it's spread via clusters. And very interestingly with this virus, quite a lot of people don't pass it on, but you will have some individuals who pass it on to a great number of individuals. So that's why it's critical to have a very, very strong tracking and tracing system that continues and all the public health measures continue so you know where the virus is and you know where you're really going to stamp down on it.
So how long after the vaccine has been rolled out for and lots of people have had it, how long after that do you think we're going to have to be social distancing and wearing face masks for?
So I wouldn't, again, be silly enough to.
No, I'm not going to hold you to a specific date. But broadly, but broadly, you can if you like. But broadly, are we talking about another year of social distancing, a year and a half? I mean, there was a suggestion from one of the medics here that we could be some aspects of what we've had to go through with COVID may be with us forever.
Well, some of the things like improving hygiene, improving reducing crowding, improving the ventilation in our offices, improving how we live. The nature's telling us that we've got to change. You know, we can't keep on ever more herding people in together. But on those specific measures, the things that people don't like not being able to go out, not being able to see each other, not being able to have what we all call a good time. Yes, this, as we increase our immune protection, as we increase the numbers of people whom we are confident are protected immunologically, and that will depend on following through and seeing how long these vaccines protect. And as we are better at understanding exactly where the virus is, we can modulate what we do and ideally get in a better place to have a better summer next year than this year.
Okay. So it's summer next year that we can hold out some hope for. Margaret Harris, thank you so much for your time. You're from the World Health Organisation. Listening to that at 11 minutes past 12 is Dr. Richard Vautrey, Chair of the British Medical Association's GP Committee. Thank you for being there for us, Dr. Vautrey. Let's start with the logistics of the rollout of this thing. We've got 50 NHS hospitals that are going to, or NHS trusts that are going to start being the hubs for this. Before it gets to you and GPs to start rolling it out, how ready are GP clinics to begin starting to give people jabs?
Yeah, good afternoon. GP clinics are getting prepared. They are working together in groups. We anticipate that a small number of groups in each area will be utilised first of all, and they're being approached at the moment by their local healthcare managers. We would anticipate that they will be ready to vaccinate patients in a week's time, which is really positive news.
A week's time. That is quicker than I think some of the government had, or the chair of the NHS, Sir Simon Stevens, had suggested at the press conference on Friday.
Well, we're hoping. I mean, this is clearly dependent on the availability of the vaccine and the vaccine being provided for us. That the vaccine will be made available to practice groups the week beginning the 14th of December. So it's that week when we would be able to vaccinate our patients. Obviously, we need the vaccine to be there. We've worked really very carefully, with local practices and local groups, and we will want to protect our patients as quickly as we've got the vaccine.
Who's going to be doing the vaccinating? Is it a case that you're going to have to take staff off other duties, possibly meaning a backlog in other things, in order to start giving people the vaccine?
Yes, this will mirror what we do on a regular basis, which is the mass vaccination of our vulnerable patients for flu, for instance. So over the last few weeks, we have been embarked on the biggest flu vaccination campaign that the NHS has ever seen. We will be doing similar work with our vulnerable patients. So it'll be using our vaccination teams, our practice nurses, healthcare assistants, pharmacists, GPs, all working together with our admin teams and devoting time to provide this vaccine. Clearly, we'll be targeting a much more limited group to start off with than the group that we target for flu, but we'll want to expand that as quickly as the vaccine becomes available.
The logistics of this are a real challenge, because once it becomes clear that the vaccine is on offer at the GP surgery, how are you going to persuade those of us who are desperate to try and get out of this mess to not drive down to the local GP and demand vaccination?
We would really encourage people to wait until they've been contacted directly by the practice or nationally through the national call and recall system before they contact the practice. So we will contact you. We will let you know that the vaccine is available, that we've got it, and that we can book patients into not just one appointment, but they'll need to book 2 appointments. So they will need to book a further appointment in 21 days' time after the first vaccination, because it's only by having 2 vaccinations that they'll be fully protected.
2 very quick questions to finish. Firstly, have you seen any uptick in the number of people who are registering or booking an appointment to get the vaccine over the course of the last few days?
Not yet. We haven't started that process yet of actually informing people that the vaccine is available and they can book into those appointments. We would anticipate that happening in the week beginning the 14th of December, and we will then be in a position to know that we've got the vaccine and we can invite people in.
And just finally, people talk about vaccine safety, of course, what's in the thing and how is it being tested. But I wonder about safety of the vaccine from another perspective, which is if people know that you've got lots of these at your GP surgery and they are desperate to get vaccinated, or they're desperate to sell it on the market, underhand, how concerned are you about the safety of the vaccine from that point of view, where it's stored, how it's kept and how it's looked after?
Well, practices and hospitals will clearly be very conscious of ensuring the safety of the vaccine. But this is a vaccine that has to be handled very carefully, and especially. It isn't something that you can simply pick up and walk out of the surgery with, and then it continues to be effective. So we would hope that people.
It's not yoghurt, was JVT's assessment.
Exactly. So this is something that needs to be used carefully by healthcare professionals who know what they're doing. We will ensure that we get it to the most vulnerable patients as quickly as we can, and we hope that patients will work with us enabling to do that.
Good luck to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining the programme. Dr. Richard Vautrey, Chair of the British Medical Association's GP Committee. My word, do we wish them Godspeed in being able to get this thing rolled out and rolled out well, effectively. I wonder if you, first of all, think that it is going to be an effective rollout. Obviously, the government have come in for a lot of criticism for how they have handled parts of the pandemic thus far. Given what we know about the rollout, I wonder if you think that actually this is where they could step up to really make this effective and as safe as possible. And if you find yourself in one of these groups, as Her Majesty the Queen does, being over 80, as Her Majesty is, are you going to be lining up to get this from Tuesday? And if not, why not? 0345 6060 973. I've got Huey here on 84850. When I get the jab, I want the same one as the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh are going to get. Then I'll know for sure the vaccine is safe. Well, at the moment, there's only one on offer. It's the Pfizer-BioNTech one, and Her Majesty has said that she has signed up for it. They'll let us know when she gets it. Are you going to be going on Tuesday? 0345 6060 973. Calls in just a moment. 12:17.
This is LBC. This is LBC, Swarbrick on Sunday, with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster.
12:20 is the time. Tom Swarbrick with you this afternoon here on LBC. Here's L on 84850. Tom, we have never had a good test and trace. So how can we continue to use it, as your guest Margaret from the World Health Organization suggested? It's interesting that it strikes me that there are enormous areas of the way in which we've lived our lives thus far that are going to have to continue even after a lot of people have been vaccinated. Jonathan Van Tam talked about some of the things that we've learned through this being with us forever. He clarified in that he wasn't suggesting that social distancing stays forever, thank goodness, but washing our hands regularly, covering our faces perhaps. And you see, I was watching this documentary and you see how the tube, particularly in London, the tube used to be, with everybody crowded into it, piling on it, shoulder to shoulder, sweating everywhere, people sneezing and gozzing on everyone. I think I'd be quite happy to wear a mask on the tube if it were going to be like that, even once people have been vaccinated, just because there's everything else that people can spread down there. 0345 6060 973. Here's Sarah in Walthamstow on the question of whether you're going to take it. Hi there, Sarah.
Oh, hi. Just got a couple of points to make. So firstly, if you can ask the experts, you said it was working age. You said it was older age adults in care homes that will take it, and does that include those that are under 65 that are in care homes? Because currently got a sister who's 35 in a neurological care home. Second point is, I just think freedom should be taken away from people who don't want to take the vaccine. I've had lots of anecdotal conversations from friends who said, I'm worried about my parents taking it. And I just think it's been a difficult time for a lot of people that have sacrificed. For instance, I live on my own. I've worked from home most of the year since March. And it's just not been an amazing time for a lot of people. And there's been sacrifices made. And I think people do have a choice. But at the same time, if they have the choice to not take it, then there is a choice for their freedoms to be taken away. They're putting the rest of society at risk. They're putting the NHS at risk. I think it's thoroughly unfair. And then the science is out there about the regulatory procedures that have gone through to make this a vaccine available. I think there's a misunderstanding from the government about the procedures that have gone through. So it's been speeded up for a process, I understand, through parallel data analysis, but a lot of people are saying, well, it takes 3 or 4 years for a vaccine, but actually it's been speeded up because of the economic climate.
Yes, I have to say, I'm afraid I just don't understand the people who say, well, because it's gone through so quickly, even though it's gone through the same process, it's just been sped up, because it hasn't been 3 or 4 years, I don't trust it. Because nobody is saying, oh, great, well, we'll just wait 3 or 4 years living like this then for you to be comfortable that it's gone through all the right processes, having never shown any specific interest in the process that vaccines go through until now.
I totally agree. And just to add to a point, for instance, my dad, and God rest his soul, he's now passed away, but he went through clinical trial for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma treatment, which is now rolled out and tested and is now widely available. But he died of something else, unfortunately. I need to make that point. But people do, and what about all those people that have been in the clinical trials all throughout this year?
Yeah.
They've sacrificed things, and so people that I don't know, as it gets rolled out and over 60s, if we go for the time plan next year, if those people don't want to take it, they should have their freedoms taken away. They shouldn't be allowed to travel. They shouldn't be allowed to see their loved ones, because I've not been able to do that this year, and I think it's thoroughly unfair. They don't want to take those risks.
Listen, Sarah, I feel distinctly uncomfortable at the idea of taking people's freedom away based on a choice that we would like them to make, but that they are free to make nevertheless. I do feel that you are basically making it compulsory by the back door almost. But I take the point about everything that we've gone through as a nation over the last 12 months, in fact, as a planet over the last 12 months, means that if you're offered a route out that is safe, and it has been adjudged to be safe by the regulator, why on earth wouldn't you take it? Sarah, thank you. Rebecca is in Seaton Sluice in Northumbria. Hi, Rebecca.
Hello.
Hello, you're on radio.
Hi. My point is, I completely agree with what your last caller, Sarah, just said. She made some really good points. Also, I work in a care home as a carer, and on a daily basis, I go in. I'm really quite paranoid about my job at the minute because, with the masks and the PPE and the people that I look after. And I think people are so selfish if they're thinking, oh, well, I don't want the vaccine. Why should I? It's not been tested and all the usual theories. This vaccine has been rushed because of, we've already discussed, the need for it to be, rolled out as quickly as possible. Because I go in, I'm sorry, I'm just really emotional about it all. I'm fed up with wearing masks. You can't breathe properly. They can't see, they can't hear what you're saying half the time. They can't see your facial expressions. You feel like it's not normal. It's not how it should be. And if people are saying they don't want the vaccine, They're just being selfish. And I bet it's the furloughed people that just think, oh, well, I'm sitting here in my house, I'm fine, I can do what I want to do. But for people like us who are risking our lives and other people's lives, they don't see the big picture.
When you say, Rebecca, that you're emotional about it, is it that you're emotional because you're angry at those who are, in your view, being selfish, or are you emotional because we finally, it seems, got a potential way out of this after so much worry and so much heartache?
Both, both of those points, really. We've all really struggled this year. You know, my brother-in-law's had to make, in his company, a lot of people redundant, and he's found it really difficult. I mean, a lot of people, we've all had our struggles, some more than others, I think.
And quite right. And I wonder, Rebecca, whether you have allowed yourself to visualise or anticipate what it's going to be like when enough people have had the vaccine that you can do your job as you used to, with no worry about spreading coronavirus to the residents that you care for, no need to wear a face mask. Have you allowed yourself to think about what that future might look like?
Oh, it just feels like such a long time ago that you could just be normal and, you know, smile, and they could see you smiling, and, you know, talking to them, and they can understand you, you know, especially the ones that are deaf, a bit deaf, bless them. You know, they're just like, what? and it's just so unnatural, you know, to have your face, your mouth covered up, because that is how we see each other's expressions, and that's how we communicate as people.
So you're going to be getting this vaccine on Tuesday. As a care home worker, you could find yourself that you're able to go and get it.
Does anybody know any more than scientists and virologists? You know, at the end of the day, they're the experts. If they're saying that this vaccine is safe as it can be, I will be first in the queue to get it, because I just feel that it's a step in the right direction to get through this.
Rebecca, great to talk to you. I wish you well for that jab on Tuesday, if you can get it on Tuesday. Thank you very much indeed for your call. Here's Joseph in Bermondsey. Hiya, Joseph.
Hello, good morning, Tom. Joe from Bermondsey.
Sir.
I'm 82 years of age, and I certainly am not going to take the virus. And the reasons are, last November of last year, I had my flu jab. January of this year, I went down with a very heavy attack of flu, which laid me out for a week, just over a week, confined me to my kitchen, actually. Literally, I felt, you know, this is normal. I have no confidence in Sage, and in my opinion, this has been rushed. The virus has been rushed. There's no real test
vaccine
being done.
Has been rushed.
And I feel there will be, for people taking medication already, there is a risk of side effects affecting anybody who takes it.
Well, Joe, let me cut in on that, because I understand why you're concerned. I think people are right to be asking questions about this. Do you know how many people this Pfizer vaccine, just the Pfizer vaccine, has been tested on?
Sorry, could you say that again? Do I know what?
Yeah. Have you got an idea, ballpark figure, of how many people this Pfizer vaccine has been tested on?
No, I don't. All I know is it's been rushed.
Well, hang on. Pause on that, because the Pfizer vaccine has been tested on 43,500 people in 6 countries, and guess what effects some of those trialists reported as feeling as a result of taking the vaccine?
You tell me.
Some trial volunteers experienced sore arms, fever and muscle ache, but nothing more serious.
Right,
the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency is monitoring for anything more dangerous.
Yeah. I accept that.
Does that put your mind at ease in any way, shape or form? It's been tested on tens of thousands of people across 6 different countries, and the worst it's got is that some people have had muscle ache and sore arms.
Wait a minute, Tom. You said tens of thousands of people. How do you break that section up of people, age-wise? How many people were my age who tried it? How many people? You know, there's so much variation. It just can't be dogmatic in that way and say 43,000 plus have tested it, and all they've had is minor.
So what do you need to hear?
That's not enough to me.
What do you need,
enough to
Joe,
justify people listening to this programme? You know, I understand, for example, in my own view, I generally keep to myself. I wear the mask whenever I go out. That is adequate precautions for, in respect
Well,
to
Joe,
other
listen,
people. I'm quite prepared at my age to risk it.
Okay. Fine. But there's going to be consequences of you risking it like that, which may be to you, but also maybe to other people around you. And I'm not entirely sure what it is that someone in your position, and there may well be many of you listening who find yourself in Joe's position, what is it that you need to hear that needs to be explained or you need to be reassured by that would allow you to think, okay, well, that seems pretty good, let's go for it. 0345 6060 973. Is it that Her Majesty is saying that she'll take it? We'll talk to Dickie Arbiter, the former press secretary to the Queen, on that news after our own. 12:32 news headlines now. Tim Humphrey.
The UK's chief Brexit negotiator, Lord Frost, has arrived in Brussels for more talks with his EU counterpart in an attempt to reach a trade agreement. The transition period ends at the end of this month. Anti-discrimination campaigners say the actions of some Millwall fans could create a divide between supporters and those working at the club. Boos were heard before yesterday's match with Derby as players from both teams took the knee before kick-off, a symbol of the fight against racial injustice. Final preparations are underway for the largest vaccination programme in British history. COVID-19 jabs will arrive at hospitals tomorrow before the first ones are given on Tuesday. The weather cloudy with patchy rain in northern England, parts of Wales and the Midlands, mostly fine elsewhere, and a high of 5.
LBC Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Text 84850.
Kath here on 84850. The vaccine must be safe, Tom. The Queen would never be put at risk. I will certainly take it. On that point, let's turn to Dickie Arbiter, who is the former press secretary to Her Majesty the Queen. Mr. Arbiter, thank you for coming on the programme this afternoon. I wonder what you make of the announcement that Her Majesty will take it, but isn't going to tell us until she has.
Well, the Queen has always led by example, and if she's prepared to take it and Prince Philip's prepared to take it, then other people should be prepared to take it. At the end of the day, it's all about saving lives and preventing disease in much the same way as flu jabs do. Polio vaccine has all but eradicated polio, as has smallpox. So I don't know what people are making such a fuss about. Go and get the vaccine and not only save your life, but save others as well.
If you were still in the job of being press secretary to the Queen, would you be pushing for pictures or images, video perhaps, of her taking the jab or having the jab to be out there in the public domain?
Well, I think the fact that the Queen is having the jab should be enough without photographs of her having a jab. I don't think anybody wants a photograph of themselves having a jab. Maybe celebrities might do it because it pushes up their ratings. But I think generally having a jab is something private, and the fact that the Queen is having one speaks volumes, and people should accept.
You don't think it might? Yeah, I appreciate it's a personal matter, obviously, for Her Majesty, but nevertheless, might it not ram home the message that if the Queen is prepared to sit there and take the vaccine like everybody else should, then everybody else would?
Now you're asking for the Queen to be a performer. She's not a performer. She's head of state.
She's a reassurance for people. I just wonder whether it might be as reassuring.
She is a reassurance, but the fact is that she is having it should be reassurance enough. It's an idea to have a photograph having a jab, but I think having a jab is something private and should be kept private.
I wonder if other members of the royal family, other senior members of the royal family, are going to come under similar sort of, not pressure, but whether it would be deemed right for when the time comes, Prince Charles and then Prince William and whoever else, to say, yes, I'm going to be getting it too.
Well, they will be getting it. Prince Charles is in the over 70s group, and I think he's third in line. I'm 80, so I'm probably number 2 in line, second group. And when Prince William is still in his 30s, so when his time comes, it'll come. He might decide to opt to have it done in public with a photographer there, but we have to wait and see on that one.
Can I ask, just finally, before I let you go, Dickie, about the? I've just finished watching The Crown now, and I can see what all the arguments were over. I wonder what your view of that. I wonder what your view of that series is, and more to the point, I wonder what you think Her Majesty the Queen might think about it.
Well, I think the Queen would be angry. I'm not in her head, and I'm not prepared to speak her words. My own personal view is it's a hatchet job, not just by Netflix, which commissioned the series, but by Peter Morgan, who has slowly chipped away at the whole framework and structure of the monarchy. The characterizations are poor. The script is absolute rubbish. It is fiction. And the trouble is Netflix came out with Diana in her own words, which they bought from Channel 4 or one of the channels. And people look at it and think that is gospel. But the trouble is you're only hearing one side of the story. And if you look back in history, Prince of Wales has not once spoken about his marriage to Diana, save admitting he did commit adultery while still married to her in a documentary in 1994.
So why do you think, if it is a hatchet job, why do you think Netflix or the producer of it, why do you think they've done it?
They've done it because Netflix is in the business of making money, and they attract a worldwide audience. And the worldwide audience watches it, and it's all streaming, and it's all subscription. So they make a lot of money out of it. As far as the Peter Morgan is concerned, he looks upon it as drama and entertainment. He did say.
Do you think they like the monarchy, or do you think it's sort of institutional anti-monarchist stuff?
Well, Peter Morgan is an avowed Republican anyway, so anything he can do to chip away at the monarchy, he'll do it. But he admitted that you can forsake accuracy, but you can't forsake truth. Well, that's a contradiction in terms, because you can't have one without the other. So it's balderdash in what he said. Some of these celebrities, some of the stars in it, for example, Helena Bonham Carter, said it is drama, and we should say so, that it's drama and it is not fact. And I'm a great believer there should be a health warning at the beginning, a verbal health warning. They've got a written one that viewers might be upset at seeing Dinah throwing herself over a toilet bowl, vomiting, suffering from bulimia. And if you can do that, then why can't you do a verbal warning? Trouble is that Netflix are in the business to make money, and they're not going to do it.
A vaccine against mistruth. Dickie, thank you. Dickie Arbiter, former press secretary to Her Majesty the Queen. 12:42. Here's Rosie in Balham. Hi, Rosie.
Yes, hello there. Hearing a lot about people saying that everyone has to have the vaccination. I don't want the vaccination. I hardly ever go anywhere. I hardly ever meet anybody except my own family. And I don't think that anybody has a right to force anybody to have the vaccination. I don't care who has it, whether the Queen, the Duke of Edinburgh, or Prince Charles. I mean, they're only an ordinary family as far as I'm concerned. They're only human beings. So I'm not worried about the royal family whatsoever. I don't believe in royalty, okay? And these people phoning up and telling everybody to have the vaccination, a lot of us can't take it. We get side effects. I get side effects. And
Sorry,
if I'm
but,
not mixing in...
but Rosie, listen. The only side effects that have been reported are some trial volunteers experiencing sore arms, fever and muscle ache.
Yeah,
That's it.
Yeah. Well, yes, I don't take the flu vaccination. It has terrible effects on me. What I'm trying to say is I'm not going
Well, why'd you
out
get the flu vaccination? Why'd you get that and not this?
No,
You
I
don't
do
have
not
it?
take it. No, I don't take it. And if Britain is going down that road to make people have these vaccinations, I should just
No
move
one's being
abroad,
made to.
I tell you.
No,
Yeah,
nobody is being made
from
to.
the country. No, I don't want it.
That's your choice is entirely yours. Nobody is forcing anybody to have the vaccine. Although I
Yeah.
would suggest that if your life has been sort of socially distanced in that sense for a long time anyway, Rosie, then you'll carry on as
Yes,
before.
I don't care to go out, you see. I lead a very quiet
Okay.
life. I
Well,
hardly
look,
ever go anywhere.
if that's your choice, that's your choice. But unfortunately, there will have to be some consequences to that. I'm not saying that the consequences are mandated. I'm just saying there will naturally be some consequences to not taking it. Thank you for the call. Chris is in Tower Hamlets. Chris.
Yeah, hi, Tom. I think it's probably worth pointing out that this issue of restricting freedoms if people, haven't taken the vaccine, it doesn't need to be an all-nothing thing. I mean, it doesn't need the government to say, everybody's got to take it. But if, for instance, giving you an example, I mean, let's supposing all international airlines say the only way you'll be allowed on board one of our planes is if you can show that you've got a certificate of vaccination. Well, that's a great idea as far as I'm concerned. And why wouldn't it go further? I mean, why wouldn't restaurants and shops and theatres, say you can't come into the building unless you've got a certificate of vaccination? Would people be happy with that?
The only thing with that is, Chris, is at what point do you start saying that as a business? Because the vaccine rollout is going to take some time. We're going to be living like this sort of until probably about March. I see the health secretary has been saying.
Yeah.
So at what stage do you bring in that kind of approach if you're a business? Because at some stage you're going to find a lot of people can't come in.
No, absolutely. But of course it wouldn't be reasonable at all to allow anybody to do that until there had been the possibility for anybody, who could be vaccinated, needed to be vaccinated, having done.
So once the rollout has been completed in the sense that everybody who wants one could get a vaccine, your view then is Chris, that you wouldn't be surprised if airlines, restaurants, bars, pubs, nightclubs said, well, I'm sorry, but because it's available to everyone, you can't come in if you haven't had it.
I mean, it's already the case. You can't travel to certain countries unless you've got a certificate of vaccination against yellow fever, for instance. So this is not something new. COVID
No, I agree.
is the thing that's new.
Yeah. Listen, Chris, I agree that it shouldn't be mandated because that would be forcing people to have it. But I think if you're a business, why on earth would you take the risk, particularly if the vaccine is available to everyone, why on earth would you take the risk of being the place where the next thing happened, the next COVID outbreak happened? Thank you for your call. 0345 6060 973. Many more in just a mo. 12:46.
Coming up at 1 on LBC, Majid Nawaz.
Boris Johnson told the EU that Britain must have the freedom to make its own rules when considering Brexit, and cabinet ministers have backed him. Is no deal better than a bad deal?
Majid Nawaz on LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster on LBC.
Let's get as many of you on the radio before 1 o'clock as we can. Sadiq's a new caller in Mitcham. Hi there, Sadiq.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well, sir. Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I was listening. First-time caller, but long-time listener, first-time caller.
You're very welcome.
I was listening to one of your calling guests earlier, who was talking about the fact that people's freedom should be taken away if they refuse to take the vaccine. That's what prompted me to call in. So I personally will not be taking the vaccine as soon as it's available. Now, I'm not saying that I'm not going to take it. I'm just not going to take it as soon as it's available. There are very specific reasons for this. First of all, there's obviously the question around the safety of the vaccine. We are 100% right to question the safety of a vaccine that's been developed so quickly. Also, there's the fact that this vaccine is the first ever vaccine that's been developed to use messenger RNA technology. Now, that technology has been around for a long period of time. Clinical researchers have been looking into it for a very long period. But this is the first commercially available vaccine that's been developed using this technology. We're right to be wary of it. And finally, and most importantly, the pharma companies that have developed this vaccine they're legally protected for any side effects. If the government wants us to take this vaccine, they have to be liable for any. If they want us to enforce this vaccine on it, they have to be legally liable for any problems that occur.
Well, you're right on that point, in that there is an indemnity there, but the government isn't. So the government can be, and has been previously, had to pay out an awful lot of money to people where it has gone wrong. On your point about speed, I would say the reason that we're told why it has been able to be done so quickly is, one, the entire world's scientific community has been trying to do this. Secondly, there has been no limit on funding. That's one of the problems, one of the reasons why it's so slow normally, is that funding is an issue. It's been a blank check. And thirdly, they've run a lot of these concurrently. So the buying of it has been done concurrently with the data examinations and the testing on people as part of the trials. So that is what is that satisfies the questions that I think you're fair in asking about how come it's been done so quickly. To me, that's a satisfactory answer. So what is it that you need to hear, Sadiq, in order to be certain as anyone can be about anything ever, that you'll take it?
So what would make me certain that I could take them? Have a look at the actual numbers from the research studies themselves, to have a look at the age groups, have a look at the various levels of health of the people that this has been tested on, and I'd like to see where
Are you a scientist?
No, I'm not a scientist, but I'm just genuinely concerned about my own safety.
How do you know you're going to be able to interpret that data correctly?
I just want to see the age groups of the people that have been tested on. I want to see my specific age group. I want to see people that are specific to my. I'm 39.
Right.
As far as I'm aware, there have been no COVID-related deaths for people my age in this country. Is that correct? Yes or no?
Yes, that is correct. The vaccination of the people that are currently being asked to be vaccinated would cover, I think it's 90 or 99% of COVID deaths. But of course, we're not locking down because of deaths. We're locking down because of protecting the NHS. I'm reliably informed, Sadiq, that the group that has been trialled on the most for this Pfizer vaccine is your age group.
Okay.
But so until you see the data from Pfizer or for the government, you're not going to be convinced.
No, I won't be convinced. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I've had all my vaccines that I'm supposed to. I'm just wary of a vaccine that's been rushed this quickly, and that's
I think
it.
The term rushed. I think. Yeah, I understand. It's fine. I agree with you about asking questions. I think, and thank you, Sadiq, by the way. I think, if you can identify what it is that you need to hear in order to feel safe, that is helpful. If it's just a general, I don't fancy it, then no one's going to help you. So I agree with being able to ask the questions, but after a while, you have to accept, I think, that the scientists who study the data and understand how vaccine trials work are going to know a bit more about it than you looking at the data yourself, if you're a non-scientist. Andrula is in Enfield. Hi, Andrula.
Hi there, Tom. Hi. You
Hi.
actually made a few of my points yourself. I think this talk of kind of what will it take to ease people's anxieties around taking the vaccine, I don't think it's the Queen taking it. That's not going to help my dad. I don't think it's celebs taking it on TV. I think it plays a bit into what Sadiq was just saying. Most people that I'm speaking with are kind of going, oh, well, I'm not going to be first in line. You know, I want to see kind of what it does to everybody else before I volunteer myself. Or, you know, oh, this has been rushed so quickly. You know, what's it going to do 2-3 years down the line? So I think where probably the government needs to be very clear, and maybe where the communication has gone wrong so far, is that they're not talking about the how, like how have we managed to create this so quickly? Like how has this managed to be kind of tested, trialled, approved so quickly? And I think you need to talk about the funding. With any vaccine, every few years, trials stop because they need to go out and get some more funding. Every few years, trials stop because they need to go out and recruit thousands more volunteers. Like never before in history have you had the funding there, the volunteers there, and you've not had to argue about price for 5 years. They're not stopping these trials every 3 years because they're kind of checking on everybody that's come before and seeing if there have been all of these adverse reactions. That's not what takes 10 years. But, the government are not kind of clearly saying that. So actually all this talk about what will it do, how can you convince people? I think it's the facts.
I think that's what I completely agree with you, actually, that they get one shot at this, at communicating this effectively in a way that is going to make people who are worried about this feel more at ease about it. And you're right, showing working is absolutely critical in this. So it's why I don't have a problem with people being cautious about this or asking questions about it. It's the right thing to do. But my word, they need to have satisfactory answers. And the answers you've just provided, Ursula, about why it is that it has been able to be done in quite a short space of time, to me, make total and complete sense.
That's the thing, even arguing about, I remember when my daughter was born, the vaccination for meningitis B wasn't available in the child vaccine immunisation programme, and we had to have that done privately. And we thought, it was expensive, we had to find the right hospital, etc. But we decided to do it because we weigh up the pros and cons of having vaccinations in our family. So that was an important one to us. Yep. But, 6 months later, after the government had finished kind of, arguing about the price of the pharmaceutical company, it's now gone into the child immunisation programmes. So, people that then had a baby 6 months after me, they got it as part of the, NHS vaccination. So it's things like that we've cut time on,
Yes. And it's interesting to note, too, that there are no plans for the Pfizer vaccine to be available privately in this country. It's only going to be available through the NHS. Ursula, listen, thank you. I just want to get in Farah, who's in Golders Green, on. Hi, Farah.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm going to answer questions if you give me 30 seconds. Okay.
Sure.
Now, whatever all the factors that you say about this vaccine being quick, with the finance and this and the other, is like 2% of it. The main thing is that the people who test this these days don't test like toothbrushes and headache tablets and this and the other, so this thing can go to the end of the queue and just be processed. Nobody's processing. They're not taking any tests on everything that every pharmaceutical company is producing. Doesn't know. We're not looking at mouthwashes and creams and skin creams and suntan lotions and things like that. We're concentrating on this. That's why this thing is being pushed in the queue. Usually, those other stuff stay ahead of the queue. The second thing is, I think that it should be compulsory for people, first of all, that want to have it. I want to go on holiday. They tell me you can't get onto a plane. I can't tell you to get vaccinated. But it's got to be at the time that when I want to travel and I'm 60 years old, I mean, let's say if I was 50 years old...
Well, listen, Farah, I actually think... Listen, I'm sorry we're going to run out of time, but I think actually that is coming. That is going to be one of the things that we see happen over the coming years, is that other nations will say, well, you're not coming into us if you haven't had a vaccine either. And I think actually a lot of people who are anti the vaccine here would say that if you're coming into Britain, you will have needed to have had it. Listen, thank you so much for all your calls. There have been so many of them. Apologies if we couldn't get to yours. Thank you so much for all your calls to the programme today. We'll be back with you Sunday morning at 10 a.m. next week, and I'm with you Monday to Thursday at 10 p.m. here for the Late Night Show on LBC. At 4 o'clock, Ian Payne right now. Majid Nawaz.
Thank you, Tom. Coming up, the collapse of 3 major chains last week has put 30,000 retail jobs at risk and triggered fears for the future of town centres. But should we stop trying to save the high street and instead change it completely? Before that, the Cabinet Minister George Eustice has declined to condemn Millwall fans who booed footballers taking a knee in opposition to racism, arguing that BLM, the movement, should be viewed as a political movement. But is it racist to boo taking the knee? First up, Boris Johnson told the EU that Britain must have freedom to make its own rules last night. And cabinet ministers, even those who previously voted Remain, have now backed no deal. So is no deal better than a bad deal?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.